Yours. Matters of privilege and recognition of guests. The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back to my colleagues to another day in the legislature. Something a little different here this morning. I was at home last night just thinking about the last year, I think like we all have been. And I just wanted to use my time here this morning to just share some emotions and feelings that I have as we mark this day of National Day of Observance of COVID-19 on March the 11th. I think just to begin, I think I'm grateful that Islanders have worked so hard and for so long to keep each other safe, Mr. Speaker. I don't think you could point to another jurisdiction in North America where people have been so adherent to the health protocols. And I really do feel that more than anything that has really gotten us to where we're at today. So to all Islanders, I offer my thanks and appreciation and eternal gratitude. I also feel sadness, Mr. Speaker, for so many of those who were cheated of a more normal existence because of COVID. I think to our high school students and college graduates who missed the last few weeks of their studies and missed so many of their normal celebrations. I think of our seniors who for too long had visited, their families and friends through computers or through a window pane, Mr. Speaker. And, it does hurt your heart to think of those kids and grandkids and great-grandkids who have had lost millions of hugs and kisses that are so important. And, and I also think to those who lost someone, Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of us in here, or many of us in here who can relate to that, and how the process of grieving has impacted and has really been intensified because we haven't been able to gather, and to meet and to laugh and to cry and hug and all the things that you need to do. And that makes me sad and a little bit mad, to be honest, Mr. Speaker. I hate COVID for many reasons, and that's one of them. I think of those who lost their jobs through no part of their own because COVID has thrown a wrench into our economy, and I think of the impact this has on individual people every day and on families and communities, and that certainly does, I think it tears all of our hearts out, Mr. Speaker. I worry about the mental health of Islanders. I feel that we've done a really good job of getting through COVID, and I have a great fear that the extension after we're through COVID might have bigger impacts on PEI than the actual pandemic itself. And that's, something that we were going to try to plan for and work for, but it's something that worries me greatly. I'm very, very thankful, Mr. Speaker, for Dr. Morrison, for Marion Dowling, and for the hundreds of frontline healthcare workers in our testing clinics and labs. And they're the true champions, Mr. Speaker, and that's the debt of gratitude we owe them. I'm very appreciative of members of this legislature, Mr. Speaker. This hasn't been an easy time for any of us. We've had to adapt and change how we do things. And I know I can speak for the members of my cabinet, the long hours, the work. You don't always see that, but I feel we've been in a battle, and I'm very grateful to have the privilege to go through this battle with all of those people, Mr. Speaker, to all the MLAs who've been supportive and flexible, our collective staffs. Nobody gets into political life as a staffer to get sleep, to get rich, or to not be busy, Mr. Speaker, and that's only been totally magnified and intensified over the course of this. And I also wanted to recognize two individuals in particular, Mr. Speaker, because I think they do need special recognition. The Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Third Party. In my mind, two fine and upstanding individuals. When I asked them to participate and help along the way at the beginning of this, the only answer was yes. They participated in committees and calls, and not once, Mr. Speaker, not once did they use it as a platform to try to infiltrate with politics. They only wanted to do what all Islanders wanted, and that was to get through this pandemic. And I really do think, Mr. Speaker, that we'll have our differences. We've had them, and I look forward to having more in the future. But two of the finest individuals I've had a chance to work with, and I think our province owes them a debt of gratitude, Mr. Speaker. And finally, I'm excited and optimistic, Mr. Speaker, for what comes next. Vaccines are rolling out. Spring is in the air. It's around the corner. I find myself, I'm almost like a big shingle fly, Mr. Speaker. I'm shaking and I'm buzzing and I'm getting ready to, after a long, long winter, I feel like I'm ready to spring to life, and I hope all Islanders can relate to that. And I feel that the horizon is filled with better days, Mr. Speaker. And I was just thinking that, that a year ago, I think each day as it passed, I found myself personally hoping for something better. I think as the days have gone on, that's gotten a little easier. It's a little easier today. It'll be a little easier tomorrow. I know there's going to be some bumps in the road ahead, Mr. Speaker, but I do think that with the experience of the last year behind us, that we can get through anything and we can make it better if we work together. So, Mr. Speaker, just on behalf of myself personally, to all of you, I say thank you very much and keep up the good work, and to all Islanders for their wonderful support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Premier for very touched by those remarks personally. And politics is often seen as a place where the goodness can be sucked out of you and the humanity can be eviscerated from those who take part. And it's lovely when you work with somebody, and I use that phrase advisedly when I work with somebody who happens to sit on the other side of the floor or beside me. And you hear such sincere comments as that. We're very lucky here in this province that we have politicians and we have a political environment in which that humanity is still very much present. So thank you for your comments, Premier. I want to congratulate Jean McLean from Meadowbank, who was recently made a lifetime member of the Kingston branch of the Royal Canadian Legion there. Jean grew up in Ontario, and she served in the Wrens there. But she met her husband, Harvey McLean, when she was stationed in Halifax, and they ended up moving back here to the island. They settled in Meadowbank. And Jean, she always wanted to be a full member of the Legion for decades and decades. But in those days, women, they could only be part of the auxiliary. And one of Jean's next door neighbors, David Yeo, I presume in a conversation with Jean, maybe not, but he learned that Jean really wanted to be a full-blown member of the Kingston Legion, and with the help of his fellow members there in Kingston, he made that happen. So, and David said this, it should have happened 76 years ago. She's 96 now, I believe. Should have happened 76 years ago. It just never got dealt with. We wanted to make a difference for Jean, and maybe a little awareness for others who are still with us, who should also have been acknowledged. And so, congratulations to Jean and to the Kingston Legion, and thanks to David Yeo for making that happen. Late, absolutely, but in some ways, all the more sweeter because of that. This morning, I wake up most mornings, and one of the first voices I hear is Mitch Cormier on the radio, and on the hour every hour you hear a little jingle, which changed, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and the one they use now was written by Logan Richard, fabulous island musician. And there was a story about Logan this morning. He was interviewed, and he and another island artist, Lonely Kid, and 3 of the songs that they co-wrote are now part of a really popular, I think it's top of the list actually on Netflix, a series called Ginny and Georgia. And there's also another PEI band, Sorry, who has a song featured in that series. But Logan's song, I think it's called Start, it's played repeatedly because it's a sort of theme song for one of the main characters. So congratulations to Logan for that. It's just an extraordinary thing. Musicians, of course, lives, as the Premier alluded to in his opening comments, the lives for all of us have changed. Musicians have been almost in a special category because they rely on being with other people to share their gifts. And, there was a day, of course, when your gift as a musician couldn't be shared much beyond the kitchen party. That was as wide as your reach could be. And then, of course, we had radio and recording. And now here are a couple of island artists whose songs are featured with literally immediate global impact. So congratulations to Logan and the Lonely Kid, and to Sorry for the tremendous work that they're doing to expand Prince Edward Island music across this whole planet. I want to also mention Lenin Recovery House. They recently offered a thank you to the folks who've been supporting them over this very difficult year, this COVID year. And even though it's been an extraordinarily difficult year for everybody, Lenin House actually opened their doors during COVID, in part thanks to money put forward by this government. And I remember one of those calls or many of those calls actually, where that was being discussed. And they opened their doors during the most disruptive time in the history, perhaps, of this province, and they're doing fantastic work there. They received thousands of donations, individual donations this year, many from people who have family members who are struggling with mental health or addictions issues, and sadly, many from families who have lost members because they lost that struggle to mental health and addictions. And they've done some amazing things with the money that they have received, both from government and individual islanders. And they had a big thank you this morning on their website. And because of your thoughtful and gracious donations, we have completed renovations on the 3rd floor. And for those who aren't aware, it's a massive building in South Rustico, South Rustico. I've got Anglo Rustico. Which of those Rusticos is it? And it's been beautifully renovated, and it's just a very special place. They finished the 3rd floor, which allowed them to have both men and women on site. They purchased 2 vans in order for residents to be able to come to and from appointments, and amongst other things, they were able to provide local gym memberships for the residents who stay there. So all of these are in really important parts of a community that is there to help many of our most vulnerable. So thank you to Diane Diane Young, who runs the place, and all of the extraordinary people who are associated with Lenin House, providing a really wonderful service to a lot of islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I too would like to rise today and speak on National Day of Observance. As the Premier said, and the Leader of the Opposition, this is it's a pretty somber day, and it's a day that we must remember all that's happened in the last year, and the losses that people have had, and the hard work of our health workers and frontline workers and people that keep us safe. And we may have our differences, but when it comes to working together towards the betterment of all islanders, that's what we'll do in here, all of us, all 3 parties. And we all have our roles, but when it comes in the final aspect of it all, is islanders come first, and we'll always continue to do that. And we must always remember, as Dr. Morrison says, the kindness word, and as Clem said the other day about the mask, the smiling face, if we know someone, you can tell they're smiling by their eyes, but if you don't know somebody real well, you don't know if they're smiling behind their mask. And we need to always be friendly and treat people with kindness. That being said, I too would like to congratulate Jean McLean. It just goes to show, never give up, 70+ years that she wanted to be a Legion member. And I've been a Legion member for most of my adult life, and I learned a lot of things when I worked at the Legion back in the 80s, and I got to make a lot of friends with a lot of veterans, and they were very special people. And when you look, I put myself in their shoes and thought, gosh, if I had to go off to war at 16 or 17, it'd be quite a thing. And they went, and look what they did for us. And we can never be thankful enough, and we need to remember them all the time. With that, I want to congratulate her again and thank David for bringing that forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbank, Third Party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to lend my words to COVID-19 National Day of Observance too, Mr. Speaker. The federal government has declared March 11th as a National Day of Observance. Flags outside of the legislature are flying at half-mast in solidarity with those impacted by the pandemic. The Day of Observation is designed to honor the memory of those who lost their life as a result of COVID-19, and as spoken here earlier, but we also remember those who lost their lives during COVID-19, and to those families left to mourn in a very different circumstances. The day also recognizes the sacrifices and dedication displayed by healthcare workers across the country throughout the last year. While we've been very fortunate to not experience any COVID deaths, we know fellow Canadians in other provinces were not as fortunate, and those who passed during COVID-19 and their families. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask this House, with your indulgence, to observe a moment of silence in solidarity with other Canadians who have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to rise today to welcome everyone watching from my district. To me, the most exciting thing happening today is the ability for Islanders over 75 being able to book their first COVID vaccine shot. I urge everyone over 75, or if you are the younger group working in the food service sector, to sign up for their shot. Of course, I'm over 75 myself, and of course I tried to get an appointment both on telephone and computer, but I didn't succeed. I hope this is just a startup problem due to the many eager Islanders seeking a shot. And I thank the Chief Health Officer for making the sensible decision to protect twice as many Islanders with just one shot. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise, say hello to everybody in District 14 today. And yes, spring is coming, and I want to say hello, and hopefully everybody's out doing something active. But more so, I just want to say I know the Minister of Finance is close to the Simmons family, and yesterday I was reading that a scholarship will be set up for Jacob Simmons through the Community Foundation, and it's a very important way to remember him, and he did a lot in his short life, and just want to say the basketball community is very tight. He was a massive member of that community, and saying hello to the family, and this is a way that we can turn a terrible tragedy into something positive. And in the application, it talks about putting in two things in there about how the applicant could help with drunk driving in the future. So I just want to take this opportunity to remember Jacob, and and just recognize his family, and we're thinking about them at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a pleasure for me to rise today and also recognize this is the COVID-19 National Day of Observance. Mr. Speaker, I think the speakers that preceded me said it very eloquently with regards to the dedication of our staff, our employees. I always do not like to use the term public servants. I prefer public service employees. But, as the former Minister of Health and now the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, I'm in awe at the dedication of these individuals that continually, not only over the last year, but still to this day, do whatever they can to make sure that Islanders are protected, that our healthcare services are moving forward, and that when we do have necessity for traffic control and such other matters, that the staff in my department step up and do that work necessary. Mr. Speaker, also I received quite a heartwarming email yesterday from an individual that I know, and I know we had talked a little bit last week about the public service here on PEI, so I just wanted to share this message. Hey James, Grant here. Far often you guys get bad reports about your departments. I've been dealing with Erica Morrissey on my next house build, and she's been so incredibly helpful, going above and beyond, and so polite and accommodating. That's client service at its best. So I did forward that to Eric because I thought she needed that feedback, and I just said plainly, good afternoon, Erica. I received the following comment from a client that you have been assisting recently. You certainly made a positive impression on this individual, and I wanted to personally thank you. To which this young lady came back and said, thank you, Minister Alward. Thank you so much for passing this on. It has made my week. So I just want to remind Islanders, we do have a dedicated public service here on PEI, and they're there to help you. They're there to assist you. Do we always get it right? No, not always. But you know what? Recognition goes a long way, and these people are there to help you. So let's give each other a pat on the back when it's deserved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise again in the House today. Hello to everyone in District 4 who's watching online and on Eastlink. I stopped by the new Cafe Coffee Shop in Eldon this morning. 3 employees in there. We're very busy, and there's another one being hired, talking about having a pizza night, and it's just great to see a new business that's thriving in the area. And just a shout out to Dave and Rose Vienna and all the work that they do. As the honourable member mentioned, Community Foundation of PEI is setting up a scholarship in memory of Jacob Simmons, and it opens on May the 1st. His sister Jana works up in the government member's office, and it's wonderful to see Jacob being recognized in this way. And I just want to send my love to Brenda and to Jana and to his grandmother Mona, all neighbors of mine. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the 14th annual Business and Community Excellence Awards through the Eastern Chamber of Commerce. The nominations are open for the Business Excellence Awards. 2 out of the 3 are from my district, and the third one, the owners live in my district. So to Ocean Acres Cottages and Campground, Butler's Clover Farm, and to Beck's Home Furniture, best of luck in the Business Excellence Award. And in the Innovation and Achievement Award, Lucky Bee Homestead in Murray Harbour North. Wonderful mustards. They've got great snacks, beer nuts and almonds, and even dog cookies, and they're continually coming up with new product. So I want to wish them all the very best and congratulate them on being nominated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I missed anyone? No? Member statements. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the meaning of a home? It's a great question that can have many different answers. This question recently inspired several island students between grades 4 through 6 to participate in a national contest for a chance to give back to their community through Habitat for Humanity. The Meaning of Home contest was a national fundraising campaign for Habitat for Humanity. Students across the country were offered the opportunity to write a composition, a poem, or a short story on what home means to them. For every entry submitted, a $10 donation was awarded to the participants' local Habitat for Humanity chapter, which helps support more families and build stronger communities. A total of 171 island students submitted personal entries on what home means to them. This in turn generated an outstanding total of $1,170 raised for our PEI Habitat for Humanity chapter. Overall, nationally, PEI finished 3 entries behind the province of Quebec in number of entries submitted. When you do compare the population of our respective provinces, you can see how impressive this accomplishment by our island students truly is. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the students that participated in the Meaning of Home contest from across PEI. And lastly, I do want to thank my daughter's class at West Royalty Elementary for participating in this contest and giving back to their communities in an engaging and meaningful way as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've said for as long as I can remember, minus a few years in my teens, how thankful I am to live in PEI. There are several reasons for that, of course, one of them being the richness of our culture. We have such amazing talent on the island, and I have never taken that for granted. Whether it be music, art, theater, culinary, writing, etc. We've been incredibly fortunate to be so blessed with an abundance of local talent, and never has there been a point in time where this has been more important than right now. In a time where there is little to no theater, art shows, music shows happening anywhere in the world, with a few bumps and changes, our shows have been able to go on, and even new ones are being created, despite the fact that essentially our island is closed. Our local artists, musicians, and organizations have stood up and said, "No worries, PEI, we got this." Shows and festivals have gone on, which is remarkable. Discover Charlottetown is not letting COVID-19 rain on its parade either. While the Jack Frost Festival has been postponed this year, there have been all kinds of creative family activities happening through Ice City. There are free skates, free snowshoes, snowshoe rentals, ice sculpting, snowman building, horse and wagon rides, dancing in the streets, outdoor U-Fit classes, snowga, comedy, music shows, etc. And while it is not patio weather for the typical human, us islanders are a tough folk who like to be outside regardless of weather, and as a result, the Merchantman Fresh Seafood and Oyster Bar, as well as the Charlottetown Beer Gardens, have been hosting sugar shacks. Islanders can go and enjoy seasonal food and beverages out on the deck, sitting around fire pits while enjoying sugar sticks. Once you have finished dining, I encourage you to get out and walk around Victoria Row and the Confederation Centre of the Arts. There are wood sculptures and beautiful light displays to enjoy. My family and I feel truly blessed to live in such a beautiful city who takes fun, entertainment, art, and culture very seriously. This weekend marks the last weekend for Sugar Shacks, so I encourage you all to get out and enjoy all that downtown Charlottetown has to offer. I plan on doing just that on Friday evening before or after Tara McLean and Catherine McCullen's show at the Trailside. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford and the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past few years, housing has become one of the most challenging issues in our province. This issue is made more challenging in no small part to the diverse impacts it has on different people. To quote the Premier's State of the Province address, the PEI housing market is very hot. That's good news and bad, depending on what side of the transaction table you sit on. The Premier is stating what many have known for years. On one hand, the construction industry is booming, real estate agents are thriving, and housing is going up left, right, and centre. The provincial government is raking in tax revenue from a strong housing market, while the Bank of Canada emphasizes the importance of economic growth despite the fact that many Canadians are being squeezed and are seeing their financial health reduced. On the other hand, everyday islanders are watching the promise of an affordable life crumble before their eyes. Young islanders and families now need the help of a down payment assistance program to afford a house. Islanders are taking out massive mortgages on homes with prices that are inflated and volatile, leaving them at great risk financially. The increased spending on housing prevents islanders from investing in themselves, starting a family, supporting local, and much, much more. Speculation, Mr. Speaker, is crushing islanders and their communities. Islanders are being priced out of the communities that they grew up in. Neighbors are being replaced by a rotating cast of strangers with luggage. Disappointingly, government has taken little to no action to curb speculation. It is promoting growth for the sake of growth, with little regard to the islanders and communities that are being severely and irreparably harmed by our housing market. Mr. Speaker, one side wants profit, the other wants access to housing, a basic human right. Rather than sitting on its hands, government should think hard and clear about what side of the table it's sitting on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as noticed. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, housing is something we take very seriously on the side of the House. And yesterday, the member from Summerside Wilmot had asked questions pertaining to seniors housing for grandparents. So I just want to make clear, Mr. Speaker, that for any senior that's in core housing, and that, of course, meets the thresholds so they're eligible for seniors housing, regardless of whether their grandchildren live with them in part or all of the time. The department works with them, these seniors in core housing, need to find the best solution to their unique situation. And based on the honourable member's question, Mr. Speaker, it was not clear whether she was referring to grandparents in the department's alternate care provider program, but Mr. Speaker, let me assure you, in the event that a child is placed with a grandparent through the department's Child Protection Services, the department will work with the family to ensure there are appropriate housing supports available. And if a grandparent meets the requirements for core housing need, Child Protection Services will work with housing services to obtain appropriate housing. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge the member from Summerside Wilmot to ask her constituents to reach out to the Department of Social Development and Housing, and I know she has in the past, and I may be even able to pinpoint that this could be a continuation of a case that she has referred. So we're going to work to fix that problem, and we're going to find a solution to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any others? For our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's becoming a regular occurrence in this House for certain ministers to make comments with great confidence that on closer scrutiny appear to be inaccurate. For example, stating, as one minister recently did, that the appropriate process for special warrants is to spend the money first and then apply for it later is 100% wrong. Stating, as was done yesterday, that aggregators, this was during debate on a bill related to energy, aggregators don't exist, when in fact they've been operating successfully since the 1990s, is 100% wrong. A question to the Premier. What are you going to do to rein in ministers who so self-assuredly make statements like that in this House?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe all ministers in this House and all those who have been in these positions before do their very best to provide the information to questions that are thorough and well-researched and well-documented, Mr. Speaker, not knowing what they're going to be in advance. So I think the ministers try to do the best we can, Mr. Speaker, and I just continue to encourage all of my ministers to follow the advice my father told me many years ago, Mr. Speaker, and that is you never worry about what you're saying if you're always telling the truth. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, during debate on that bill, Bill 103, the Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action dropped a casual comment about small modular nuclear reactors, or SMNRs, and the possible role that they may play in PEI reaching net zero electric energy production by 2030. A question to the Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action. What role will SMNRs play in this government's plan to reach net zero by 2030?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that's a good question, and to answer it in a simplistic way, we don't know because we don't know where they're going. We know that over the right across the country, led by the federal government and the Department of National Research, we're looking at SMR. So I sit on a national board with all the other energy ministers, and it's been a topic on every agenda item every time we've met in the last 5 or 6 meetings. And basically, other jurisdictions are looking at it as a way to meet their goals as set out by the federal government. We don't really have that ability, but we do have a kind of a partnership that we've developed over the years with NB Power, where we're part owners in the Point Lepreau plant, and I know New Brunswick's plans to build SMRs are to basically use spent rods from the Point Lepreau plant to build their SMRs. What I have said, and what I basically will continue to say, is that we should be and will be having conversations with New Brunswick as to be where we would fit in that play, considering we're partners with Point Lepreau. I feel like we should build the ability for this province to become a partner in that at the time they become a reality, which is a few years away, and that the government of the day could execute on that decision. So I don't think we should run away from any ideas as we try to reach our goals of carbon neutrality. And if you look at the IPCC reports, they clearly state that nuclear is a pathway for the Paris Accord result set, and I think that other jurisdictions in the world you're going to see follow in this same path. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks. And for reference, New Brunswick, Point Lepreau, which was recently refurbished, was $1 billion over budget, $1 billion, and 3 years late. And that's not an untypical pattern for nuclear developments over the last several decades around the world. A committee of federal, provincial, and industry players, the one that the Minister was just referring to, put forward a roadmap for development of SMNRs in Canada. This roadmap only envisions a demonstration project, one demonstration project to be ready by 2026, and it doesn't at all expect commercial production to start until at least 2030. A question to the same minister. Why are we even talking about an unproven technology as the solution when it won't even be available, if it ever is, until after the government's commitment to reach net zero?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as the honourable member knows, when I was in opposition, I often criticised government for not planning beyond 4-year cycles, and they didn't plan far enough ahead. And that's why we're being aggressive with our net zero targets. We're planning outside of the scope of the next election period, outside of the expected likelihood of this government to still be in power at this point. But given the current poll numbers, who knows? I certainly won't be around at that point. So I think that we have to look forward, and we have to put ourselves in a position that the governments of the day and the islanders of the day will have the ability to offer and bring forward the solutions as they come available. That's why we need to be part of these conversations. Also, as you notice, the United States is really coming on board, and they're one of the countries now, as well as the UK, that are talking about SMRs. So with those big players in place, I think you can anticipate there's going to be a rapid growth, probably more money put into it. You're probably going to see a lot more jurisdictions come with a proof positive that is a fully working entity that can be exported into these other locations. So I think you're probably going to see them come much quicker. And all I want is that we're there at the table, just like every other jurisdiction in Canada, so we can have the same voice as every other province in Canada, so that we can make the same types of decisions that every other province in Canada is able to make. I don't think that's too much to ask. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition mentioned, nuclear energy has a long history of cost overruns, including the nuclear power that we import from Point Lepreau. Paying for these cost overruns results in part in increases to electricity rates. According to Maritime Electric and IRAC documents, the cost of power from Point Lepreau has gone from 4 cents per kilowatt hour to 11 cents per kilowatt hour to now nearly 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Question to the Minister. What effect do you think this 8-fold increase in the cost of power has had on island power rates?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this taxpayers Prince Edward Island have been involved in Point Lepreau long before my time. This Point Lepreau has been around for a long, long time. I know that the previous government had become involved with the upgrades to the plan. I know that because of that, we owe a significant cost towards the asset over there that we have to pay back. So all this stuff happened before me. That said, we are an owner in Point Lepreau. We buy our power from NB Power, so we import the majority of our power anyways. And I mean, in context of, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, hey, nuclear bad, Tories over there want to build a bomb or something, but all we're really doing is trying to keep our avenues open to have discussions. Just like we're having discussions about the Atlantic Loop to get clean power from Quebec. Like, we're keeping all of our doors open because we're a province that doesn't have the assets that other provinces has. Because of that, we're at a disadvantage, but because of that, we're at a significant advantage where we can keep our doors open and we can court many players and get the best deal for Islanders when the time comes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the best deal for Islanders at the time. Let's talk about that. Let's look at our options. On one hand, we've seen the cost of nuclear power increased 8-fold in recent years, up to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. The cost of power from wind, on the other hand, has been going down in recent years. The PEI Energy Corporation's producing wind power at around 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and this has been declining every year. Question to the Minister. Which do you think is a better buy, 15-cent nuclear power or 3-cent wind power?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a little rich that the member over there who has the bill on the floor that's basically going to gut anybody's ability to make any money here in Prince Edward Island with wind would ask me what the better deal is. And when talked about yesterday that the assets that make Islanders money that we currently put into good programming through a budgetary process that we're hoping and planning to put towards our net zero goals to bring down our carbon footprint here in Prince Edward Island, to help low-income Islanders get heat pumps, to help low-income Islanders get electric cars, to bring in smart meters to the province. All of those things were going to be funded through the Energy Corporation. And the honourable member sat on the floor here yesterday and basically nodded his head when I said you'd sooner taxes go up. He'd sooner taxes go up, so he'd sooner your taxes go up at home than for us to continue to collect and make money off an asset that Islanders have paid for taxpayers' dollars in the hundreds of millions of dollars and completely throw that out the door and instead tax you poor people at home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a tax in place right now, Minister. You're taking in $8 million a year in taxes from people who can't afford to pay. Small modular nuclear reactors could potentially be part of our future energy mix if the research and demonstration projects in the next decade or two work out. But as our carbon reduction targets recognize, the climate crisis is immediate. We don't have time to wait for the chance that this technology works out. But luckily, we don't need to. We have cheap and proven renewable energy available right now. Question to the Minister. Why is government looking to unproven and, based on past experiences, very expensive technology when we have proven and low-cost renewables available right now on PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I feel like maybe the member needs an intro course to energy on Prince Edward Island because he doesn't seem to understand it as well as he thinks he does. The wind didn't blow the last 3 days. We haven't had any power in Prince Edward Island from our own assets in the last 3 days. There's grids. The grids will actually, you go online to Peter Ruckabina's page, it'll show you how much power we produced here in Prince Edward Island. The rest had to be imported. Luckily, they were imported from clean sources. 84% were clean sources from New Brunswick. The rest weren't. I mean, so what the honourable member is saying is that we have renewables. Yeah, we do. We invest in them here. We absolutely do. What he's saying here on the floor yesterday is he wants to gut that. He wants to take our ability away. He wants to take the ability away for us to pay for that asset. He wants to take our ability away to grow that asset so that we can become 100% renewable here in Prince Edward Island and instead tax islanders. So he wants to take an asset that is capable of making money for the taxpayers of Prince Edward Island to redistribute to the poor people in Prince Edward Island, to put back into great projects for renewables here in Prince Edward Island. He'd sooner throw that all away, take all that away, and just dig deep, deep, deep into your pocket. Boy, oh boy, doesn't that sound like a Liberal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Somerset St. John.
Speaker, I think the Minister needs to understand that when... I think the Minister needs to understand that when a business enters into a power purchase agreement with any utility, it's going to make them money. They're not there to break even. So the PEI Energy Corporation can do exactly the same thing, Minister. You can lower the rates for islanders. You're just greedy and want to keep that money for your own corporation. You sit on the board of it. The rollout of local renewables has additional benefits as well. It will create jobs and local resilience here on PEI. It will give islanders, if my legislation is supported in this House, access to the true low cost of renewables on PEI and open up new avenues for clean tech development. Question to the Minister. Are you more concerned with protecting the profits that the Energy Corporation makes on the back of island ratepayers and which come back to government, or would you rather protect the people that voted you into your seat?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a pretty loaded question. It's pretty rich from somebody who wouldn't even stand up for his own utility in Summerside in this House time and time again. And finally, only this session was the first time he's ever even asked a question on their behalf, though they've been to see us in government numerous times and quite clearly have been ignoring them. As far as us being greedy with our asset that we own, the one that you were against, the one that's up east that you're clearly against, you're clearly against the renewable plans that we're trying to put forward. That greed, that so-called greed that the honourable member talks about is going to put heat pumps in low-income homes. That's going to put electric cars in low-income driveways. That's going to put smart meters on everyone's home so they can control what their consumption is on Prince Edward Island. We're going to help lower the overall consumption through efficiencies here on Prince Edward Island with that money. That kind of greed is going to take us right to net zero. And if that's what that member over there calls greed, then I'm proud of it, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud of it. And I think we should have more of it because we can do great things with that money, of that renewable resource that has been built by numerous governments over the last 15, 20 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Housing continues to be a pressing issue in our province and in our country. Just this past week, Reuters reported on the housing market on fire, where desperate Canadians are paying more and more to get in the market while speculators continue to profit. Rising home purchase prices suggest that it's also happening here on PEI. A question to the Minister of Finance. Do you think it's healthy that home buyers are overextending themselves just to afford a home?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we talked about before COVID, the island was doing very well. The economy was doing very well. We've got immigrants moving into the province. Those are all good things, and yes, they do come with their challenges, and one of them is the housing market, and it's something that this government has been working on to try and make housing more affordable for islanders, to help them with their first-time home purchase, with help with a down payment, and we'll continue to do that. We're constantly looking for ways to house islanders and to make sure that they do have a roof over their head. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister mentions COVID. This happened long before COVID. This is something that's been building for a long time. The PEI public accounts for 2019-2020 makes numerous references to the strong housing market as a source of government revenue growth. If islanders are overextending themselves to afford housing, I am certainly concerned that the government is once again raising revenue on the backs of vulnerable islanders. A question to the Minister of Finance. How much tax revenue does the province generate from construction and sale of housing?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do not have that number right in front of me, but I'll be quite happy to bring it back. I think it's important that, again, we look at, with the challenges of a growing economy and, you know, the number of industries on PEI that are doing better than they've ever done before, we do experience a challenge with housing. We'll continue to work with islanders. We see more and more bills all the time, and we expect that to continue. The housing market is booming again, even during COVID, and we expect that to continue in the future years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would suggest that as the Minister is looking at those numbers, she also looks at how they've increased over the last number of years, because it's been a significant increase. And I would take a note from the Minister of Energy yesterday when he was talking about his modeling. That would be a great thing that we could have to actually model what our tax policy is doing to islanders. Last year, we called on government to implement a vacancy tax, a tool which ensures that secondary non-seasonal residences are being used for housing. Can the Minister please advise the House on the progress of working towards implementing a vacancy tax?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is definitely something that we have been looking at. We're not there yet, but we'll continue to make sure that if we implement it, that it will be applied to the proper houses, to the people that really are not here, living here or away for a certain period of time. And we want it to not impact a lot of our seasonal residents, for sure, but that's a complex story as to who lives here and who doesn't and how long they live here. So it's something that the tax department is looking at, property tax is looking at, and will continue to do so. And it's something that I have been definitely pushing with this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been over a year since I asked about vacancy tax. That's a long time, and I do understand that COVID has happened. However, when you look at what the impact of the housing market has to our vulnerable islanders, I fully agree we have to look at what the definition is, and I certainly wish that the Minister would actually have a definition in a year. That's something that could actually be worked on during COVID. According to the Canadian Bankers Association, the percentage of mortgages in arrears in Atlantic Canada is nearly double the national average. Question to the Minister, are you concerned about these numbers, and what are you doing to reduce them?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I think all Atlantic Canadians would be concerned about mortgages in arrears. We've had a number of requests to this House, including, more deferral of property taxes, but I can tell the honourable member that we're very close to where we were with property taxes the year before to date. People are paying their property taxes. I will definitely get the numbers on the mortgages that are arrears here in PEI. But as I say, with the stresses of growing the economy, with having more money in the coffers of the province, which we do dole out to all departments to make sure that we have the services there. It's a good news, bad news story, but we understand the stresses around housing for islanders, and we'll continue to work with islanders and with not-for-profits to ensure that there is housing for all islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Community care facilities across the province are taking care of some of our most vulnerable islanders. And in my area, community care facilities often care for level 4 long-term patients because there are no long-term beds available elsewhere. Back in December, Health PEI notified the community care facility in my community of their troubling decision to discontinue grant program designed funding to ensure that facilities could maintain safe care and COVID-19 infection control protocols. Mr. Speaker, costs have increased substantially, and community care homes have enhanced infection control practices. My question is to the Minister of Health. Aside from administering federal government funding to community care facilities, what has your government done to support community care facilities during the pandemic.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yes, there have been initiatives from our government to support community care facilities, Mr. Speaker. And those initiatives have been with regard to looking after increased costs, whether it's with regard to personal protective equipment, whether it's with regard to the increased costs associated with cleaning, disinfection, Mr. Speaker. And I would note too, and I'm sure that I am very aware of the community care facility that the honourable member is speaking about, and I actually will be meeting with them virtually next week, and certainly look forward to suggestions, feedback that they may have at that point in time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Pomeroy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just let me remind you, Minister, that community care facilities in my area are now taking care of level 4 patients. And that's because your government has no place for level 4 patients to go to. They have no place to go to. So the community care facility in my area is saying, we're going to give them a place because we're not going to throw them out. So, and related to COVID, the restrictions in these facilities haven't eased. And the facilities continue to spend additional money to ensure they are providing a high standard of care and that they are compliant with the restrictions from the Chief Public Health Office. Minister, why did you stop supporting community care facilities at the end of December when public health restrictions from your government remain in place?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think that it was certainly is my understanding that it was made clear to all community care facilities that if they could provide documentation showing the continued cost of the impact of COVID-19 on those facilities, that my department would be most willing to continue to work with them, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member references the ones that are in community care facilities at levels 4 and 5. I would remind the honourable member that, yes, we are working with partners across the island to increase the number of beds. We look at the previous administration, Mr. Speaker. I do give them credit for constructing new facilities, but when they did that, Mr. Speaker, they did not have the foresight to increase the number of beds when they did construct them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Pomeroy, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, these level 4 patients, they need, the community care facility needs to bring in extra staff to take care of them. And it's not of any fault of their own. And it's not, you can't go back, you have to deal with the situation as it is now. So these community care facilities are giving level 4, level 5 patients a place, since you can't provide that. So Minister, will you commit to helping these community care facilities in our province to maintain safe operations, to care for level 4, level 5 residents, and anything that's COVID related?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I had referenced there in the answer, I believe it was to the honourable member's first question, I do have a meeting virtually with the community care facility that the honourable member has referenced. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, as new to this ministry, but having a certain grasp, I would have to say, of the healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, I am more than willing to look at possible options, staffing models, and the like as we move forward. And I do thank the member for bringing these matters forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary-Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, government has spoken about the structural changes to PEI's healthcare system by moving to a more collaborative model from the collaborative model that already exists. In a media interview following the throne speech, the Premier indicated that 3 new medical neighbourhoods would seek to address the ever-growing patient registry. Now, I'm hoping that asking questions of the Premier on that issue of health is not too politically incorrect by any means, but as a third-party member, I feel I have to ask the questions, Mr. Speaker. So, to the Premier, when will the 3 medical neighbourhoods become operational? What communities will these health neighbourhoods be located in? And how did or will you decide where these medical neighbourhoods will go?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think more information will be available in the days ahead with the budget being tabled tomorrow. I think that it would be safe to say that the three to begin, Mr. Speaker, I expect there'll be more of them over the course of time. I think the three to begin, Mr. Speaker, will be primarily directed toward those areas where the greatest need is in terms of those requiring the services who don't currently have a family doctor, Mr. Speaker. But more details certainly to come, Mr. Speaker, and I look very, very forward to sharing the information.
The honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness.
Like a kid before Christmas, I'm always looking to find out what's in this wonderful budget speech, Mr. Speaker. But when the Premier gave his State of the Province address, he left many Islanders with the feeling that he'd given up in trying to ensure a doctor for every Islander. In recent comments, the Premier has instead sought to shift the focus, saying that the new model of collaborative healthcare will seek to address the registry, which I might add today now sits at 16,140 Islanders. Question to the Premier. Exactly how many individuals will come off the registry in 2021 as a result of the new model of healthcare? And how many patients will be assigned to these specific three neighbourhoods? Or can any Islander go to these particular facilities?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is a very good question, and I would again reiterate, Mr. Speaker, that we have not given up in the recruitment of doctors, as the honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness is, in spite of his incredibly articulate efforts to suggest that, Mr. Speaker, it couldn't be any further from the truth. What we're trying to really do is deal with the realities that we face in 2021, which successive governments for far too long have chosen to not address, Mr. Speaker, and that is that individuals in PEI are required are in need of health care, Mr. Speaker. It used to be we lived in a province where that health care was delivered primarily first by a family doctor, Mr. Speaker, but there has been so many changes in the delivery of health care in this province and in this world, Mr. Speaker, and we have to keep up with that change. As I said in my State of the Province address, there's a doctor there, Mr. Speaker, for those who need them, and there will always be there, but your entry into the system now might be a little bit different, Mr. Speaker. You might not see the family doctor first, Mr. Speaker. You might see one of the many, many, many different varieties of professional health care delivery we have in this province, Mr. Speaker. This is a nationally approved program. All of the health professionals in PEI, Mr. Speaker, have been asking for it for a long, long time. I don't understand why the previous government didn't do it, Mr. Speaker, but I'm certainly glad to.
The honourable member for O'Leary-Inverness, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as I recall, the patient registry actually has doubled since my time that I was minister, Mr. Speaker. But certainly, but I agree, there's no doubt that doctor recruitment has been a big challenge, Mr. Speaker, and has been for some time. When the Premier announced this new model for healthcare, I think many Islanders were very curious and somewhat intrigued. However, based on watching the patient registry rise faster than a PEI debt ticker, Islanders are far more interested in seeing what actually materializes than what was promised. Premier, what specific healthcare services will be offered at these medical neighbourhoods? Is it going to be provided by family doctors, nurse practitioners, RNs, healthcare workers, or janitors? Who's delivering these services, Mr. Speaker? And will there be additional services, or are they just going to be services that are moved around, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and they call me a storyteller. What he forgets to mention, Mr. Speaker, is that for 11 years, the patient registry was kept low because the previous government wouldn't allow people to register for the registry, Mr. Speaker. They preferred to bury their head. They preferred to bury their head in the sand, Mr. Speaker, and they said if we don't let them sign up, we'll pretend that there's not an issue, Mr. Speaker. But I don't have the luxury in the job that I'm in to pretend there's not a challenge, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to take the best medical advice I can take from medical professionals who do this for a living, who are consulting with their counterparts across the country and beyond, to try to revolutionize how we provide healthcare services in this province, Mr. Speaker. And to answer his question, I think all of those individuals that he mentioned and many more will be available, Mr. Speaker. And I really do hope there's a janitor there to clean up after as well, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Cornwall Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will try to stick to the facts. No stories from this corner, but yeah. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, as we all have, been approached, I'm sure, by people about the vaccine rollout and who's getting the vaccine first and why. And my response personally has been be patient, and everybody's working as hard as they can. But, Mr. Speaker, there was one concern that was raised to me that I thought maybe deserved some attention in the Legislative Assembly. Blood service workers are on the front line every day working to ensure our blood supply is well managed. And if we all recall, there was a major call out to the beginning of COVID-19 for blood donations. So additionally, it is virtually impossible for these people to maintain 6 feet distance when you're drawing blood or plasma from a patient. So I was just wondering if the Premier could explain briefly how is the vaccine priority groups determined? Is it solely the discretion of CPHO, or do you or the Minister of Health have any input on the matter?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that's a very good question, and I have to be totally honest. I would need to double check with Dr. Morrison and her staff to find out where blood services workers would fit into the current rollout. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to follow a national protocol that all of our colleagues through public health are working at the national level to try to determine the best possible way to get the vaccines rolled out to those who need them quickly, and then to sort of quickly descend to make sure all of those who want a vaccine can get it. I feel more confident today than I did last week with the intensification of the procurement from the federal government. That's all good news. But it's Public Health Canada, it's NACI, it's a number of other tables, Dr. Tam taking advice from the World Health Organization and others, Mr. Speaker. But it is, we're trying here in PEI to stick to the similar national protocol that's been rolled out across the country. And I can honestly say that to date I haven't asked Dr. Morrison to put somebody ahead of the other in the line. I've been taking my advice from her.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's one other group that came forward to me a couple of times, and that was the RCMP. And Mr. Speaker, sitting on the side of the House, and obviously I heard the Premier's comments, and I know that in some other provinces the RCMP are getting vaccinations, but Prince Edward Island, their union sent out a letter. I believe you can go online, and this morning I looked at it. It was on February 4th, where they sent it across the provinces, hoping to prioritize those workers. But I guess if it's possible for the Premier to speak to Dr. Heather Morrison in this regard, because I think these healthcare workers are really no different, or maybe even coming in more contact. So could the Premier please assist in this and at least bring back an answer to the House?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll certainly do my best to try. I mean, as you can appreciate, and I think all members and all Islanders can appreciate, that we happen to live in a province where I think the vast majority of people want to get vaccinated as quickly as they can. Nobody wants to be suggested that one group is more important than the other, so we're really trying to follow that national protocol. But I will consult with Dr. Morrison and come back tomorrow with an answer in terms of where the RCMP and frontline professionals fit into the rollout, Mr. Speaker.
Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Meraldona. Monaco Kilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents from my district have reached out to me because they are left waiting, stressed, and near a breaking point. They decided to reach out to me after the death of Lexi Dakin, a grade 10 student in Fredericton who took her own life in February, after being sent home from the emergency room without help. They worried their daughter might be the next Lexi Dakin. In my constituent's case, their daughter has been dealing with mental illness for a couple of years now, and recently has been told she may have borderline personality disorder. The question to the Minister of Health: what specific supports are currently available for Islanders living with borderline personality disorder?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and certainly appreciate the honourable member bringing this matter forward. I know that we've had so many discussions here in the legislature, not only this session but previously, with regard to mental health services, where we can improve upon. And Mr. Speaker, I have to be completely honest, being new in the ministry, I'm still in a fairly steep learning curve. But with that, I would certainly encourage, and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation, a telephone conversation, or to meet with the member and his constituents and to bring in the ones from the department that may be able to point in the right direction or in the best direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Monaco Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Adding to all the stress while trying to navigate the system was COVID-19 and lockdowns. In this particular case, the individual had serious mental illness, self-harming, suicidal thoughts and threats, extreme rage, and violence towards others. Initially, they were able to receive some counseling, but were told she needed more help than they could offer. They did receive follow-up with a psychiatrist fairly quickly, within 6 weeks, via phone, for about a half an hour. However, they never received any follow-up after that. They were left for months wondering what was going on and what would come next. A question to the Minister of Health: is it appropriate that an individual who is considering and threatening self-harm to go months without any follow-up?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And short answer to that, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely not. I think you look at some of the initiatives that we are working hard on with regard to single point of access, to be able to provide individuals with the information, with the programs, with the contacts that are going to be able to help these individuals out, these families out at the end of the day. But I do certainly agree with the honourable member. To go weeks, months is without the follow-up that, as I understood from the honourable member, had been alluded to, had been promised. That is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Monaco Kilmuir, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They had called looking for follow-up from the psychiatrist and was given the assistance line and never received any follow-up. Things got so bad that even the school was pushing for her to see a psychiatrist. This time, there was follow-up, which they did really appreciate. However, next they were told she would need treatment for borderline personality disorder, which is called dialectical behavior therapy. Unfortunately, this therapy isn't available due to a lack of resources, so the counseling she is receiving is a Band-Aid solution. A question to the Minister of Health. Minister, what can we do to ensure the therapy is there to help those living with borderline personality disorder right now?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am aware of the therapy. As I understand it, it is offered in-house, but I also would like to refer the honourable member and any individuals to a program that is called ICANN, and which I think could be certainly of assistance, help in this situation. But again, Mr. Speaker, I'd be more than happy to meet with the honourable member after to look at some of the programs that are in place, such as ICANN, that could be of help, and to have that discussion with him, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the House, the Premier asked that we, quote, dial down the political rhetoric on mental health to not try to score political points, unquote. Holding government accountable for its inaction on the mental health and addictions crisis is our job. One that Islanders not only expect us to do, but they're crying for us to do. In 2018, the UPEI Student Union launched a letter-writing campaign calling on government to implement per-student mental health funding for post-secondary students. In that year's budget, the government included $200,000 of funding. A question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. Can you tell us how this initiative has directly supported post-secondary students?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. I do appreciate the Honourable Member continuously asking questions around the mental health and well-being of our students. I understand our government has made a significant commitment to the mental health supports at our university, and I am looking forward to addressing, or the budget address tomorrow, whereby there will be some additional supports there. Sorry, but most certainly I can look into this and bring this matter back to the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it appears it hasn't been doing much to help students. The 2019 public accounts show the Liberal government spent $0 of its budgeted funds to support post-secondary student mental health, and the 2020 public accounts shows this Conservative government followed suit. The budget line doesn't even appear in the financial statements anymore. Question to the minister. I will table the documents. Why should anyone take this government seriously on mental health when it is defunding mental health supports?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Defunding, I'm incredibly surprised to hear this as this government, and I know the former Minister of Education has pushed to ensure that, especially throughout COVID, that there's been significant additional supports towards our school counselors, autism supports, psychologists, so on and so forth. Again, as I suggested earlier in my previous answer, there is some good news in the budget, and I look forward to speaking with the honourable member about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It must be in the process. It must be magically appearing tomorrow. I will table the budget that shows that that line has been removed. Lack of mental health supports can have devastating impacts on youth who can experience poorer educational performance or difficulties accessing services as they transition to adulthood. I sincerely hope government reinstates this fund and hope this government gives a voice to young people when it develops its policies and programs. Minister, how is your government ensuring students have direct input into the design and delivery of programs intended to support them?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to hear us speak about students here in this House. I was truly disappointed when I looked at the official opposition's to-do list and students weren't mentioned here. Our school system wasn't mentioned. It really, really disappointed me, and I have to say, the honourable member knows, the day after I was appointed, I reached out to her. She was one of my first contacts. I want to ensure that we have an open, collaborative dialogue. I understand that this is important to her, although the opposition's list of priorities didn't include it. But this government, Mr. Speaker, I look at the COVID contingency investments here, the sheer volume of new staff that were added, 186 staff, Mr. Speaker, throughout the last year. I look at counselors, consultants, EAs, autism consultants. Mr. Speaker, it's incredible. Anyway, I just have to say, I hope that in the fall, winter to-do list, that students and their well-being will be included in their list of priorities. Thank you very much,
A rise in a point of order. Mr. Speaker, in comments made by the opposition party about the previous government 2018-19 on budget and allocation to UPEI for mental health assistance. A couple things, Mr. Speaker. Supporting a new doctorate of psychology program, UPEI will support education and retaining psychologists, providing, providing $25 of funding per UPEI student for mental health supports per student. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, I'll take that under advisement. Report back. Speaker will decide.
He speaks the truth.
Minister statement. The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 has been a part of our lives for an entire year now, and as we've talked about, it's been quite a year. Since then, masks have become a required accessory, and hand sanitizer is never far out of reach, Mr. Speaker. Students have learned remotely, and virtual meetings from our home offices have become a professional norm. Sports, festivals, and entertainment essentially stopped. Kids miss birthday parties, seniors have felt disconnected, and businesses have had to adapt and find innovative ways to operate under public health measures. COVID-19 has changed the lives of everyone, Mr. Speaker, and no one has been spared from its impact. But throughout it all, Islanders have been resilient. We have showed up. We have found new and creative ways to care for our neighbours. We took the advice of our Chief Public Health Office, and even when it was difficult, we took action and we made decisions that were in the best interests of our entire province. Mr. Speaker, our healthcare and essential workers have put in tremendous hours. And in doing so, they have kept our communities safe and they have kept our communities functioning. And to all of those workers, I say thank you, Mr. Speaker. Truly, I say thank you. COVID-19 has infected over 864,000 Canadians, including the current 143 cases that we have seen here in Prince Edward Island to date. Our province has completed over 110,000 tests, and we have ongoing testing and screening happening to protect our communities. As we continue to deal with the impacts of the global pandemic, our government will continue to do whatever it takes for however long it takes to support Islanders as we make our way through this. The vaccine rollout is exciting. We're not out of the woods yet, Mr. Speaker, but there is light at the end of this tunnel, and I do believe for the first time in a long time that we can see the other side. I want to thank Islanders for embracing changes. We have come a long way. We need to continue to keep the faith and to continue to push forward as we look to a post-pandemic world and province. The Government of Canada is designating today, March the 11th, 2021, as a National Day of Observance. On this day, I invite all our Islanders to join together in honoring the memory of the Canadians we have lost, the people they have left behind due to COVID-19, and also to recognize everyone who has been impacted by the pandemic. We also want to pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to all those who continue to work hard, who continue to make incredible sacrifices in our fight against this virus. As Islanders, we are strong, we are resilient, and together, Mr. Speaker, we will beat back COVID-19. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome and appreciate the Premier's remarks. As I mentioned earlier, I also welcomed and appreciated his opening comments when the House opened earlier this afternoon. And during that earlier address and greetings, the Premier expressed a whole bunch of emotions. He expressed gratitude, sadness, anger, worry, appreciation, all emotions that we have felt along the COVID path over the last 12 months. And as we stand here today on this COVID anniversary, anniversaries, of course, are typically causes for celebration. And in some ways, indeed, it should be. It is here on Prince Edward Island. We have much to celebrate a year after COVID arrived on our shores. We've had good management, good advice from the Public Health Office and our Chief Public Health Officer. We've had strong leadership from the Premier, and for that, I thank him. We have had a dash of good luck, of course. You can't get through something like this without a little bit of good fortune, and we teetered on the precipice of things that happened in almost every other province in this country on a number of occasions. And thankfully, we leaned back every time. And again, regardless of how good your management is and how strong the leadership is, there has to be a dash of good luck in there to keep you on the right side. Our geography obviously helped. The fact that we are an island gave us a lot more control over many of the things, particularly the movement, as Dr. Heather Morrison said the other day. When we move, the virus moves, and if you can control that movement, you protect yourself to a large extent. But above all, the reason we've been successful and the reason that we can celebrate this odd anniversary is because of the hard work of Islanders. And as the Premier just said in his remarks, there are so many people across this province who deserve our thanks and our gratitude. The island way of our commitment to each other, that strong community solidarity that we have here, has in many ways been the vaccine that has inoculated us for the last 12 months before the real vaccine arrived. And that's something to be extraordinarily collectively proud of. It's been a year of sacrifice, it's been a year of fear, it's been a year of loss. And it's, I think above all, it's a year from which PEI can emerge with its head held high. feeling proud of ourselves, feeling proud of the way we have conducted ourselves. We've stayed on task, and we've stayed, as we've been implored to do, we've stayed kind and we've stayed patient. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Mr. Speaker, today marks, as has been mentioned, the one-year anniversary of the World Health Organization's declaring COVID-19 as a global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, there's almost too much that has happened over the course of the 12 months to touch on. While here in Prince Edward Island, we have been very fortunate to have no COVID-related deaths or hospitalizations. The rest of the world and the rest of the country has not been so fortunate. Mr. Speaker, across Canada, thousands of families have lost loved ones, and it's important to remember that these are not just statistics. These are brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, and grandparents. While chief public health officers across this country have done their best to help protect us, we must also take this opportunity to thank and congratulate all individuals who have done their part to keep our province safe by social distancing, wearing masks, washing hands, and following the rules and guidelines that are in place to protect our society. And honors have done that very, very well, Mr. Speaker. We will get through this, Mr. Speaker, even when it feels like we won't, and we will come out the other side stronger for it. In the meantime, let's remember those who have lost, appreciate those who work diligently to keep us safe, and let's all do our part to get through this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to rise in the House today. March is Pharmacy Appreciation Month, and I would like to take this opportunity to extend our gratitude to the pharmacists and pharmacy teams who have continued to work tirelessly in our communities and hospitals throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, pharmacists consistently rank as one of the most trusted professions in Canada. The public often relies on the advice and expertise of pharmacists and pharmacy teams in guiding their healthcare making decisions. Mr. Speaker, pharmacists are accessible to every community and every islander. The Department of Health and Wellness has been working in collaboration with the Chief Public Health Office to roll out COVID-19 vaccines in community pharmacies. As per Chief Public Health Office guidance, in the coming weeks, pharmacists will play an integral role in ensuring timely access to COVID-19 vaccines for islanders. We applaud the willingness and desire of pharmacists to step up quickly and without hesitation, Mr. Speaker, to ensure this vital public health service is conducted in a timely manner. And Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health and Wellness is also pleased to announce that effective April 1st, funding will be provided to allow pharmacists to assess and prescribe for uncomplicated urinary tract infections for eligible island residents free of charge. It is expected that this publicly funded service will alleviate some of the pressure on other providers in the healthcare system that currently assess for this common condition. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to continued collaboration with pharmacists and pharmacy teams to explore more ways to integrate their services into the health system to improve access for all islanders. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank pharmacists and pharmacy teams again for their commitment and for their dedication. I look forward to continuing to expand upon the collaborative working relationships we have with this important group of healthcare providers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to extend my thanks and recognition of support to pharmacists who are an integral part of our healthcare story here in PEI. I know, anyone who's had experience with going there for the flu shot over the last couple of months, years, knows how efficient and effective it is to be able to go to a pharmacist for that. In fact, we heard from the PEI College of Pharmacy in the Health and Social Development Committee back in September. They told us knows about the long and really complex process of expanding that limited scope of practice they have. There's only 30 minor ailments that pharmacists can actually currently prescribe for. And so seeing the prescription being expanded to include UTIs is a really critical one. UTIs, urinary tract infections, are also known as acute cystitis. They are an incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly painful bacterial infection that is really easily treated with antibiotics. They're also most commonly experienced by women. In fact, perhaps I can check with the House how many people in the House here have had a urinary tract infection. Yeah. How awful was a urinary tract infection? They just have to wait to go and see a doctor, get a prescription, and wait that extra day or so to be able to start a treatment is an incredibly unnecessary use, not just of the resources of the doctor, but it's really unnecessary for those who are suffering with something that's so easily treatable. So it's a fantastic addition to the scope of practice for pharmacists. But, Mr. Speaker, I would just add that there were other things on the scope of practice expansion that were submitted by the college to Health PEI back in 2019, as well as the prescription for UTI. It also included conjunctivitis, herpes, and psoriasis. Mr. Speaker, it also included contraceptive management. And I would suggest that if we can manage to finally address something that is a part of a women's health wellness solution, like a prescription for UTIs, it's also time we think about allowing pharmacists to prescribe birth control. I think in 2021, we're well past the point of them needing permission from a doctor to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness, third-party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too want to congratulate the Minister in making this announcement. I also want to say pharmacists are a very crucial component of our healthcare delivery system here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. And in many instances, pharmacists are the only healthcare professionals in many of our island rural communities, and many of them are going above and beyond their normal duties to help islanders access the most basic levels of healthcare. While it is wonderful to hear that the Minister is willing to praise our pharmacists for the month of March, I'd like to praise them for their year-round contributions to healthcare. But we must remember that in many cases, pharmacists are the front line of our preventative care situation, Mr. Speaker, especially through this pandemic. And in many cases, pharmacists are going to government telling them that they can do more. And in many cases, these offers seem to be falling on deaf ears. I know during my time, Mr. Speaker, our island pharmacists certainly had come and lobbied me many times, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, I agreed with some of their recommendations in saying that we were the first, was the first minister to allow pharmacists to administer the flu vaccine, Mr. Speaker. And we rolled that out, and it was very successful. And even at my time, they were asking for the delivery of urinary tract infection prescriptions, and I'm happy to see that. And I'd also encourage government to agree with the member from Charlottetown Belvedere to allow pharmacists to prescribe birth control processes, Mr. Speaker, for patients. I think it only makes sense. But I do want to also acknowledge the two pharmacies in my riding, Mr. Speaker. In O'Leary-Inverness, we have two pharmacies, one called the O'Leary Pharma Choice, and the other is the O'Leary Medicine Shop. And I certainly acknowledge, I noticed on the website yesterday, Mr. Speaker, that the O'Leary Pharma Choice has been added to the list of pharmacies, of the 6 pharmacies that are going to be able to administer the AstraZeneca COVID vaccines to food service workers under the age of 29. So I would encourage the Minister to let's continue evolving what services that are appropriate for our pharmacies to deliver with our healthcare delivery model here in Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You're getting there. That's good.
End of minister statements.
Well, I had a tougher time. You wait and see. You wait and see when you get.
Presenting and receiving.
That ain't easy.
Petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By leave of the House, I beg leave to table PEI Student Financial Assistance Corporation. That shows, indeed, the line was there under student mental health, and then it was subsequently removed. And I move, seconded by the member from Mermaid Stratford, that the said document be received and do lie on the table.
Shall carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table the official opposition 2021-2022 operational budget priorities to clarify for the Minister of Education that when we ask for $2.9 million of student debt forgiveness, that's actually for students, and when we ask for mental health and addiction supports for Islanders, students are in there. She may wish to read it. And I move, seconded by the member from Summerside Wilmot, that the said document be received and do lie on the table.
Should it carry?
Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a document from the United States government showing that aggregators have been in existence in the United States since 1997, the benefits that accrue to communities, and I suppose it'd be page 2 of Energy 101. And I move, seconded by the Leader of the Official Opposition, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Should it carry? Any more tabling of documents? Did I miss anyone? Reports by the committees? Introduction of government bills. The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be entitled Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, and I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the same be now received and read a first time.
Should it carry?
Bill number 19, Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act, read a first time.
Overview, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This new provincial act would provide additional protection for foreign workers in PEI through the following. Require recruiters of temporary foreign workers to be licensed. Require employers to be registered with the province. Establish criteria for issuing, refusing, suspending, or canceling a license or registration. Impose penalties for recruiters and employers who violate legislation. Allow a government to recover and return to workers any fees charged illegally by recruiters. Create 2 registries, one for foreign worker recruiters and one for employers. Require recruiters to provide temporary foreign workers with written contracts, and require recruiters and employers to provide information to temporary foreign workers about their employment rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any more bills? Introduction? No. Okay. Government motions. Orders of the day, government. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Growth, Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 4th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 4, an act to amend the designation of beneficiaries under Benefits Plans Act. Bill number 6, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill now be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 6, an act to amend the designation of beneficiaries under Benefit Plans Act, read a second time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House now do resolve itself into Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the designation of beneficiaries under Benefit Plans Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist at the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to commence with a brief statement on the bill's intent?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This update lets islanders designate electronic and beneficiary for benefit plans like RRSPs and TFSAs.
Okay. Honourable members, is the wish of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause, or just open it up to general questions? General questions? Okay, the floor is open. Summerside, South Drive.
Could you just give a general overview of the act?
Sure. This is a small amendment, but we think an important one. The purpose of the bill is to allow for the designation of beneficiaries under benefit plans to be completed electronically. Current law in PEI prohibits the making of testamentary documents by electronic means, and because designations of benefit plans like RSPs and TFSAs are technically testamentary, they fall within the definition of will. So what we're doing is clarifying in the legislation that an electronic designation of a beneficiary is permitted.
Summerside, South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. The changes to the Act mean that the Electronic Commerce Act applies to instruments other than wills. Can you explain what that might mean?
Sure. What we're doing here, previously, the Electronic Commerce Act prohibited, I can read the provision, it prohibited the application of that act to wills and their codicils, trusts created by wills or by codicils to wills, powers of attorney to the extent that they are in respect to the financial affairs or personal care of an individual. So what we're changing this to is to say that the Act doesn't apply to the following instruments, those being a will, trust, or power of attorney, trust created by a will or power of attorney, unless a contrary intention appears in another enactment. So currently, the purpose of the designation of beneficiaries and under Benefit Plans Act is to allow for electronic designations of beneficiaries. But we wanted to change the Electronic Commerce Act so it was flexible as well in the future should this assembly decide it wishes to amend, let's say, the Probate Act or the Powers of Attorney Act to allow electronic designations in those particular instances. The amendment we're making to the Electronic Commerce Act, though, continues to prohibit those instruments being made electronically until such time as their home statute expressly provides for it.
Summerside, South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Last sitting, there were changes to the Insurance Act that addressed circumstances where a benefit plan might not be taken out and put someone at risk, for example, a lucrative life insurance policy. Does this Act interact with those changes in any way?
Not specifically, no. Currently, under a Benefit Plan Act, we can think of RSP or TFSA, you can download a form off the bank website and you specify the account number and who you're designating as your beneficiary, often your spouse. All this does is say you can do it electronically. So we're not changing the substance of what can be done in respect of Benefit Plans Act, benefit plans. What we're doing is we're allowing for it to be done electronically.
Summerside, South Drive.
I'm good.
Well, you're good. Any other Leader of the Opposition?
Thanks, Chair. I know that, for example, real estate sales have changed dramatically in the way that they're conducted between agents, and it's almost always done electronically now, and that was presumably, I don't know, but presumably as in response to COVID and the inability to actually meet in person and do that. Was the reason for this coming forward now similar in order that we can do this not necessarily in person?
I think the issue perhaps was brought to more attention than it might have been. I think it would have come to our attention eventually. You could still print off the form and mail it in. So I wouldn't say it's a COVID-specific initiative, but certainly it gives islanders another choice, island consumers another choice. If they don't want to print it off and mail it in, that can be a rather lengthy process and not as convenient as other aspects, let's say, of electronic banking that we do today.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned the Probate Act and the Power of Attorney Act as other acts that may follow suit in future. Are there any other acts where we're going to have to either choose to or mandated to make changes like this?
Well, the Electronic Commerce Act applies fairly broadly to any enactment where something is required to be in writing. This is a very specific exemption, or a specific carve-out, I'll say, for wills, powers of attorney, and trusts set up in wills. And I believe, I'm not sure when it was originally brought forward, I believe at the time it was brought about to try to protect against fraud, because electronic e-technology, the security features that we might have today and that are being developed today didn't exist. So we wanted to make sure that we could confirm the identity of people. Now, I know British Columbia, I believe, allows electronic wills, and we may eventually get there. And that's made possible by the increased security and technology. But as far as I know, the only carve-outs specific to the Electronic Commerce Act were the wills, trusts created by wills, and powers of attorney.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. And you mentioned an interesting point, Blair, that technology, of course, has changed our lives in every aspect, and including in terms of our legislation and the necessity, in some cases, for it to be updated. And I'm wondering whether this amendment brings us sort of up. Are we at the head of the pack now, or are we just sort of catching up with other provinces? You mentioned BC in terms of going to fully electronic wills. Are we still at the back of the pack here? Or I shouldn't say still. Are we at the back of the pack after this?
I would say the information I have is BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick. Currently, the law allows it. It's not to say that their statutes specifically enable it. They just don't get in the way.
Sure.
In our case, the Electronic Commerce Act got in the way. So I would say we're probably middle of the pack. I think COVID in some jurisdictions has brought an increased focus on how can we update our legislation to take advantage of the electronic tools that are available to us. But I'd say everybody is still trying to feel their way through this change, and it will probably take still some time before we get to where we need to be.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Shall I carry? Carry.
I move the title.
An act to amend the designation of beneficiaries under Benefit Plans Act. Shall I carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be entitled An Act to Amend Designation of Beneficiaries under Benefit Plans Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 16th order of the day now be read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 16, Interpretation Act, Bill number 17, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill be read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 17, Interpretation Act, read a second time.
The Honorable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall carry.
Carry.
The Honorable Member from Tignish Palmer Road to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
This is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled Interpretation Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for answered?
Blair Barber, Legislative Specialist at the Department of Justice and Public Safety.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to start with just a general statement on the bill's intent?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This act is proposed to replace the current Interpretation Act.
Okay. Honourable members, is it the wish of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or open for general questions? Okay, it's open for questions, and I have Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. Could I perhaps ask just for like a general overview or even an indication of sort of what the primary changes are that are being done in this tabling?
Absolutely. So, just as way of background, the Interpretation Act, not a lot of people are aware of it. It provides greater predictability to the interpretation of legislation. It offers useful definitions and rules about the form, application, and presentation of legislation, and provides a statutory basis for the general approach to statutory interpretation used by lawyers in the courts. The primary objective of this new Interpretation Act is to adopt a more user-friendly structure that incorporates modern and inclusive legislative language. The current act was enacted in 1981, I believe, 40 years ago, and doesn't align with current legislative drafting practices. This new bill, we have tried to make it consistent with the content of the current act in terms of the substantive content. However, the language and structure of provisions have been updated to be consistent with the Model Interpretation Act developed by the Uniform Law Conference of Canada. In terms of what is being added to this act, we are adding a new section, it's section 16 of the bill, to provide an interpretation rule in respect of statutory references to foreign enactments. New section 23 is added in respect of the impact of a change in the sovereign. So we provide that when Her Majesty is succeeded on the throne, that any references to Queen will be interpreted as King, for instance. Section 29 is added in respect of the delegation of powers or duties under an enactment. The list of definitions that are applicable to all enactments, we've updated them a little bit, but we've moved them to a schedule at the back of the statute for more user-friendly access. And we've changed provisions regarding appointments to expressly provide that appointments cannot be made retroactively. This is, in fact, the law, but we wanted to make it clear for everyone to know what that law is. And also that a person cannot be deemed a member of a body after the expiry of an appointment if the person doesn't act as an appointed member. So we do have a provision in the Interpretation Act currently that says if your appointment lapses, you continue until a new person is appointed or you're reappointed. And this just clarifies if you put in your resignation and don't participate in the board anymore, you're not held to be accountable as a member of that board. In terms of the content that we're not continuing, there are a number of sections that we thought redundant. They're basic law, or they are completely unnecessary because they're addressed in other statutes. So subsection 2.2 of the current Act, we're not continuing this. It was unnecessary. It simply confirmed that the Interpretation Act applies to itself. And in the new Interpretation Act, you'll see that definitions apply to all enactments, or the provisions apply to all enactments. That includes the Interpretation Act. In 2.3 of the current Act, there's an unnecessary provision that confirms that the Interpretation Act doesn't exclude a rule of construction applicable to it and not inconsistent with the Interpretation Act. Again, not really necessary. Section 12 of the current Act, another unnecessary provision, provides that definitions in an enactment apply to the interpretation of definitions. And of course, if you are familiar with our statutes, you'll read Section 1, typically it says, in this Act, these are the definitions. Section 23, we took out a provision that provided that the Interpretation Act computation of time provisions apply to private legal instruments. This was common in the older form of interpretation legislation used across the country, but we didn't think it's appropriate. When you're talking about private legal instruments, what is important is the intention of the parties. If they wish to incorporate the Interpretation Act provisions, they can do so expressly, but to have them apply or imposed because of the Interpretation Act, we thought wasn't appropriate. The Interpretation Act is there to help us interpret legislation, not to interpret private instruments. 24.1 of the current Act, this was an unnecessary provision which provided that anything required to be done before a judicial authority is to be done by the judicial authority with the jurisdictions or powers in the place where the thing is to be done, which seemed rather obvious to us, so we didn't think it was required. In Section 26, we've updated Section 25, I should go to. There's a provision about gender and the interpretation of language that refers to male gender or female gender. It used to say male gender includes female, female includes male. The modern language used in the Model Act is any gendered language refers to any gender or a corporation. 26, we used to have the definitions, as I mentioned, buried in the middle of the Act. We've updated some of the language to be more consistent with the way we draft today. We also removed some definitions and made consequential amendments to put them in the Acts where the terms are used. Because they're only in a few Acts, we didn't think it was appropriate to overload the schedule to the Interpretation Act. Section 35 provided for the effect of the 1974 revision of the statutes on unproclaimed statutes. Well, they were revised in 1988 as well. This is a spent provision. Section 36 we found to be an unnecessary provision. It deems references in legislation to be a submission under the Arbitration Act. That's already covered directly in the Arbitration Act. And 38 sub 2 provided this is an unnecessary, 38.2 in the current Act provides that every regulation under the authority of an enactment has the force of law. Again, it's not really necessary to state that expressly in legislation.
Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate your enthusiasm for the complexity of this work. You answered a couple of my key questions, which are around the provision for gender and the sort of, that's a cultural change as much as a legal change, I feel. One of the things that you did mention, that was mentioned, Chair, was how this references to so many other pieces of legislation. Are there any other legislative changes that are required that are predicated on this piece being approved?
Towards the end of the Interpretation Act, before the schedule, there is a list of consequential amendments that are being made. and there are quite a few. Most of them deal with the citation of the Interpretation Act, so we're updating it. But as I mentioned before, we took out some definitions. Most of them are around police. So security police officer, and we've replaced it in those acts where it's referred to as meaning a security police officer as defined in the Police Act. So we've basically done if we've removed it from the Interpretation Act, we've tried to do a one-for-one and put it back where it belongs. And quite frankly, for users of legislation, it's much more helpful to be able to find that definition in the Home Act rather than to go to the Interpretation Act.
Charlotte Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. I also appreciate that, just in terms of having just recently been trying to track down definitions and finding, I think, 5 different variations of the same thing depending on where you look. So it's again, recognize how we pull this thread and all these other threads are going to come undone. How is this done in other jurisdictions? Is this sort of the common approach, and is this something that our other jurisdictions are also dealing with, needing to do this kind of update?
Yeah, the Model Interpretation Act from the Uniform Law Conference was developed in 2015, and all jurisdictions are at various stages of updating their legislation. So some of them were already ahead of the game before 2015 and may be content with where they are now. Other jurisdictions were equivalent to where we are. You can see it's the same sort of language. All jurisdictions in Canada have an Interpretation Act, and there are some variations among them, but for the most part, they're fairly standard. And that's one of the reasons why we like the Uniform Law Conference approach. We thought it had been looked at, usually the Uniform Law Conference has academics, they'll have legislative counsel, folks from across the country with extensive experience. They'll look at it, and all jurisdictions get to contribute in that process to refining the product. So for the purposes of a small jurisdiction like ours, it's incredibly helpful to get best practices to incorporate into our statute book.
Charlotte Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. You had mentioned earlier around retroactive appointments. Can you just go back to that, just give some clarity on that? Because obviously we rely extensively on boards.
Sure.
And I'm just, yeah, if I could just get some clarity on that piece around retroactivity, that would be helpful.
Sure. Unless you have more of a legal background, it's not always obvious that when you make an appointment, you can't, unless your statute says you can backdate it, it's not always obvious that that's the case. And so what this does is just make it incredibly clear that the default rule is you can only appoint going forward. And I think that's important because, we have a number of agencies, boards, and commissions, and some of them make significant decisions, and it goes to whether or not they're validly constituted. So to have this here, I think, is just helpful for everyone involved to know what those rules are.
Charlotte Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I appreciate that clarity because we'd obviously, you're right, like the ABCs manage, significant responsibility and fiduciary responsibility as well on behalf of the people of the province. And the liability, the legal impact of that from a risk and liability perspective is significant. So, it tells me that there may have been a challenge with that, perhaps, that clarity was required. I'm not going to ask you to answer that, but I understand the nuance of it. Is there anything else in that act where you felt that you needed to do that, or that kind of specific clarity was required, or is that the main example?
We also added the same section about in appointments if somebody carries on but they've resigned but they're not formally removed from the committee, that once their appointment is over, even if no one is appointed and they're not participating, that they are not part of the board. And it goes to your point about the liability piece. Yeah. If someone wants to resign, the current act is rather silent. It just says you continue, and so wherever we can, we try to bring clarity to the legislation so that people will know what the situation is without having to go and get a formal legal opinion.
Charlotte Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. Just my final question was just, was there anything in this huge amount of complex updating that you wanted to have included but were not able to, or just wasn't available at this point?
There's some innovations in other jurisdictions that we looked at. We also looked at removing some of the dated terminology in our list of definitions. But one of the challenges we have, and it relates to the overall statute book, we can update the Interpretation Act, but we can't update it so much that it no longer aligns with the existing statute book. And so the main challenge I think we have is we need to keep doing what we're doing now, which is updating the statutes frequently to bring them up to speed, and then go back to the Interpretation Act and update the Interpretation Act as we do that. So we have some language in our land legislation is notorious for this old legal language, the herein's and hereafters, and we would love to be able to take those out, but the problem is back in the day the drafters may have relied on the Interpretation Act definition to inform how that provision was drafted. And so we can't simply remove it and hope that the judges and lawyers will interpret it properly. We have to leave it. So that really is the biggest challenge, I think, and restraint on moving forward and modernizing it as much as we would have liked to.
Good. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I'm fine. I'm sorry, Chair.
No problem.
Covered my questions.
Any other questions? Shall it carry?
Carry.
Shall the schedule carry? Carry.
I move the title.
Interpretation Act. Shall it carry? Carry.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Carry. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be entitled Interpretation Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 14th order of the day now be read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 14, an act to amend the Engineering Professions Act, Bill number 4, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill now be read a third time. Second time, sorry.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Bill number 4, an act to amend the Engineering Professions Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honourable Member from Dignus Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be entitled an act to amend the Engineering Profession Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Alan Maynard, Director of Public Works and Planning for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much and welcome. Promoter, would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Certainly, Chair. So I guess first I'd like to say that this is something that's been in the works for quite some time now, and the professional organization that represents the engineering profession has been asking for it, and PEI is actually one of the last well, I think we're actually the last jurisdiction to enact such legislation. So a quick overview would be this bill will provide a new section to the Act respecting limitations for civil actions related to the practice of engineering. As I stated, every province except PEI has enacted legislation to establish an ultimate limitation period, or ULP. The ULP acts in conjunction with the existing limitation period to provide a definitive end date for an action to commence, which is now indefinite. These amendments will balance the interests of persons seeking to litigate claims and the interests of defendants who seek to avoid and/or defend claims.
Thank you very much. Is it now the pleasure of the committee that the bill be read clause by clause or just open up to general questions? Okay, floor is now open. Summerside, South Drive.
Quote, the injury, loss, or damage is sufficiently serious to warrant a proceeding, end quote. How is sufficiently serious determined? Is it implied, assumed when a proceeding is initiated?
That would probably be a legal question. I'm not aware of what would constitute that particularly.
Summerside, South Drive.
So in this act, you're not sure what this statement would apply to?
Let me look here.
Remember, can you just point out the exact clause that you're referring to?
24(1)(3)D.
3D.
I would have to think that it would be when someone wants to take proceedings against an engineer for his work. So if there was an injury, loss, or damage that was sufficient that somebody wanted to proceed and recover their losses or damages, that is when the proceedings would proceed.
Summerside, South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So sufficiently serious is up to whoever wants to initiate the proceedings?
Yep, is when the plaintiff would want to initiate the proceedings.
Summerside, South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. That's all.
Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. First of all, you know, as an architect, I was in the same group as engineers, having unlimited liability, I believe, would even pass beyond my death on my. So it's interesting that it's coming up now after decades of negotiation. My question is, who's bringing this forward? Is this coming forward from the Engineers Association that want to limit their liability?
Yes, this is specific to the Engineers Act, and so they've brought it forward as a single item for consideration.
Charlottetown, Brighton.
How are you arriving at the limitation period? I know there's certain liability cases, like there was a parking garage that collapsed, you know, a few decades ago after 20 years of operation. What's the limitation in this, and why is it? How is it chosen?
Well, in this case, the Act, as it's amended, is identifying a 15-year ultimate limitations time period, and really, it's consistent with other jurisdictions. If you look to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, or others, it's very much in line with that.
Charlottetown, Brighton.
So, can I ask this question for you as a government representative? Are you worried about losing the ability to recover from the engineer's liability insurance after those years?
Well, for a little bit of background, what I have done is I've consulted with risk management. to have them provide me advice, just as you're asking, you know, does this open us up to anything that would be untoward by limiting that ultimate limitations period? And the conversation back was very much, this is consistent with other jurisdictions and shouldn't be seen as I guess, as something that's going to water down the position of government.
Charlotte Brighton.
Well, I hope it applies to architects too eventually, so I can sleep at night. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
So, Chair?
Yes.
Just to clarify, the act that looks after the architects comes under a separate department, a separate act. So we can certainly go back and take a look at, or ask the minister responsible for that department to take a look at that and bring that information back for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just so you can sleep well at night.
Are there any other questions? Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
Thanks, Al.
I go.
She's pushing you out.
Jeez. Thank you.
Hardest part of your day.
Yeah, great.
Did Darren ask you about?
Chair, I move the title.
An act to amend the Engineering Profession Act. Shall it carry?
Carry. I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carry. Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendments.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Thanks, Jeff. You're welcome. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Engineering Profession Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member for Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the second order of the day now be read.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Order number 2, an act to amend the Architects Act, Bill number 3, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 3, an act to amend the Architects Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to Chair of the Committee of the Whole.
Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Architects Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Yes, Andrea Triolo. I'm the Legislative and Applied Research Analyst with the Department of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you and welcome. Honorable Promoter, would you like to begin with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do want to point out, Mr. Chair, this is Andrea's first time on the legislative floor, so hope everyone can be kind. These amendments are being introduced in order to raise the threshold for design of buildings requiring the service of an architect. We have consulted with the Architects Association on the measures, and they are supportive of this change. If you remember in the legislature last year, a member pointed out that the law required architects be involved in smaller designs, so that's why we are bringing this forward. And it also, it was in the Department of Transportation and Innovation, but has recently moved to the Department of Agriculture and Land. So.
Honorable members, is it the wish of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or open for general questions? Okay, Charlottetown Belvedere. Sir, Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
In general, I don't have any problem with the bill. I've already cleared it with the association and discussed with it with the department. But there was actually one issue that got brought up with the previous engineer on the Engineers Act, which is addressing the limitation on the liability, which applies to architects as well as engineers. As a matter of fact, architects typically carry a blanket liability insurance on an entire project, so liability, so ending a liability. So I honestly don't know if that has been included in an earlier amendment or not, but I would like it to be addressed if it hasn't been.
Not to my knowledge, it hasn't been addressed. I believe there will be broader amendments coming in consultation with the Architects Act, or with the Architects Association at a later date. These particular amendments were just to address a very specific question.
Okay.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that. Then I just want to make a general statement, and it's really to the legislature, about the power of these act that controls associations and colleges and stuff like that. We have the architects locally as well as nationally has been working with for almost 40 years, and I've been involved in most of it. So as a result now, architectural professionals can now move freely not only across Canada, but across North America, and we can accept immigrants in from the entire world and deal with them and have them enter the profession. So you won't find any Brazilian architects driving cabs in Charlottetown. They can come here, they can work in the profession, and by fairly easy means get registered and all. And so I want to bring that back to, we just recently passed amendments to the Act of Medical Professionals, I think it was called. The legislature has tremendous power to change that, so because it's those local organizations that make immigrants who have professional qualifications unable to work here easily. For instance, in my own riding, I have a family practitioner from Mexico. The best she could do here was to work as a clerk in a drugstore. I have a client that was mine while I was still an architect, the dean of dental surgery from Saigon, that now all he can do here is run a coffee shop. I think there's work to be done for the government. I know you're always looking for health professionals. That would be one way and you're not in competition with many other places in the country for using this. The people that already come here have their own choice. They're here, you just have to arrange it through them, and the power to do so lies with the legislature, of course, with cooperation of the professionals. That's all.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'm all with the all for the amendments, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. O'Leary Inverness.
Minister, something that was brought to my attention by a number of, I guess, businesses like mostly in the food processing business. So I use the example would be the oyster industry, and they all have to build buildings or industrial buildings as such, and they have to have I think it's an architect stamp or is it an engineer stamp? I'm not sure. But I guess what I'm trying to get at, is there any limit to the size of the building or like the value of the building where you have to do this? In other words, if there's a lower amount that you wouldn't have to get a stamp?
Yeah, the amendments, thank you, member. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendments would increase the threshold so that an architect would not have to be involved in design of most structures under 300 square feet or less, or less than 3 stories tall. So that's.
Oh, okay.
O'Leary Inverness.
So I guess where some of the businesses that I run to, they're fairly large square footage, but they're not. They're one floor, obviously.
Right.
So you're saying that as long as you're not over 3 stories, you don't have to have an engineer or architect stamp?
And not more than 300 meters squared. So it's
no, but that's my point.
area and height.
So if it's more than 300 square meters or 300 square feet?
Oh, sorry, I said feet, not meters.
Because that's a big difference. So if it's more than 300 square meters, then that's when the stamp would be required. It has not really, well, the height is a factor if it's less square footage, but over the 3 stories. But if it's, so it's still, see, that's where some of them, 300, that's a fair sized building, all right. Okay.
Yep.
I appreciate that for the update.
You're welcome. Charlottetown Winslow.
Thank you, Chair. Just with regards to subsection 25.3, the Act is amended. Can you maybe explain to me why the temporary public structures such as stages, tents, or carnival rides, or what that kind of entails? Like, is it just the size of those, or they'll need an architect to design those here?
No, so at section 25.3, all of these groups are all of the groups that are excluded from when an architect is required.
Okay.
So an architect would not be required for temporary public structures.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Shall it carry?
Thank you, Leonard. I think we're going back with the.
Oh, wait, that's okay.
Yeah. Just I read meters, but I can't answer. I move the title.
An act to amend the Architects Act. Shall it carry? Carried.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Province of the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration bill to be entitled an act to amend the Architects Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 6th order of the day now be read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 6, an act to amend the Planning Act, Bill number 8, ordered for in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House now do resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Row to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Planning Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
In unison.
Yep.
Granted. Sorry, hang in there.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansard?
Yes, Andrea Triolo. I am the Legislative and Applied Research Analyst with the Department of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you very much. Promoter, would you please commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. These amendments are being introduced as a part of our response to some of the changes that the COVID-19 pandemic has forced government on the public. The Planning Act is being amended to permit public meetings and public inspection of buildings to take place using electronic methods. This would apply at times when there is a state of emergency in place under the Public Health Act, the Emergency Measures Act, or a local state of emergency under the Municipal Government Act. The current law requires public meetings and public inspections of certain documents under the Planning Act, but doesn't contain language that would allow for technology. So this is why we are bringing this amendment now.
Thank you very much. Honourable members, it's the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or open to general questions. Open to general questions. It will be Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And nice to see you. Thanks for being here, Andrea.
Thank you.
So could you give a brief overview as to who this impacts? So the Planning Act in particular for these public meetings, because it's unincorporated, I think, right? Is that, am I correct in saying that's?
It's all provincial planning, and there will be some planning at the municipal level that will be impacted by this, but mostly provincial planning, so unincorporated areas.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And when you say some municipalities, what defines whether a municipality is impacted by this?
There is a particular planning procedure under this act where municipalities can apply for some power over their own planning, and so that it would apply in that situation as well in terms of meetings taking place electronically.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you for that. And so can you just outline the urgency to bring this very defined focus of amendments for this piece of legislation?
Sorry, yeah, so these amendments were drafted in response to the restrictions that have been in place for the pandemic. The Federation of PEI Municipalities specifically requested that the department look at these issues because due to the pandemic restrictions, there was a risk that certain councils could have decisions overturned if procedural obligations were not met. So the Federation specifically requested amendments to allow municipal governments to carry out functions when emergency measures prevented these in-person meetings.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And how have the municipalities and how has the planning been impacted since COVID? So we're a year into this. So do you have feedback back from the Federation of impacts or anything like that?
I do not have any feedback from the Federation at this point. I mean, we're in a situation now where I believe there are certain in-person meetings allowed. So these amendments are really for situations where there is a state of emergency and there's a total lockdown, for example, or complete restrictions on who can meet in person.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And was that the case during COVID, that there were public meetings that weren't able to be held? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, there was, particularly early on when we were in lockdown, there was an example is the UPI building that had to have a public meeting, and we were in pandemic lockdown, so, yeah.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just wondering if you could just talk to me about the urgency of this particular amendment versus the Planning Act review. And I know anytime that I've asked about the Planning Act or the Lands Protection Act, you referred to the Land Matters Committee. Why is this one so important?
Well, this one is, it's to deal with, you might remember, I remember quite clearly when I was on the floor with the Emergency Measure Act, and this is directly one of those, when the committee asked to go back and to find examples, and this was one of the examples. So still being in COVID, still being unsure, we thought we'd bring this sooner than later, and of course, we're going to open up the Planning Act this fall, I hope, and after Land Matters.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And it's my understanding that there was reviews of the Planning Act even before COVID, and that there were recommendations for amendments to be made at that point in time. Did you review those recommendations when you were reviewing this particular set of amendments in order to see if there was something that you could bring forward in addition?
Yes, and this was the one that had a sense of urgency, and the rest were we'd wait till the Lands Matter group came back with the report.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And so I know I've questioned you a lot on the Land Matters process, and so one of the comments I recall was if there was something that was identified through as being more like a more urgent matter or whatever, then you'd bring that forward as soon as you could. In those consultations prior to COVID, can you kind of give us a sense of what some of those recommendations were with that piece of legislation that there were concerns around?
Not with having them in front of me right now. You mean the ones that the department have already been working on?
Yeah.
There's a large list of them, and it's still under review, and I don't have them with me, and Andrea, I don't know if you have them with me. But, I think the Lands Matter group is going to get that list to review as well.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question before I hand it over to somebody else. So I submitted a question around what's the time frame of the Land Matters PEI, and given the Planning Act has gone on, like consultation and input has gone on way before COVID ever happened. Can you give me a sense as to when we will actually be sitting here on the floor debating legislation around the Planning Act?
This fall.
Okay.
I hope. We're supposed to be getting a document May, early June. So this summer we'll be working on legislation to change the Planning Act. I think the Planning Act is extremely important, and it needs some attention.
Okay, sorry, I love.
Mermaid Stratford.
I just misspoke on the question.
I spurred another question.
You did. You tend to do that. That's why I like committee of the whole house. I get to ask more. So to that point, so when you say this summer, there is a long lead time in order to develop legislation, and we sit again in October. So if you receive the document around May, June, And given the timeline and the lead time to develop legislation, is this fall a commitment on updating legislation for the Planning Act and Lands Protection Act?
It's a goal.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford,
I'll pass to somebody else. Thank you.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Well, the intent of these amendments is okay, but I've been attending several public consultations, presentations regarding projects in Charlottetown over the past year, and have some serious concerns with the way they're conducted. I know even at meetings at City Hall, for instance, you can go there in person and you're not really supposed to say anything, not to listen. It's just not the same sitting on a computer and listening to somebody and not even being able to give any vocal support or disapproval of what's happening. And I was wondering to what extent this one here sort of makes extra efforts to get the feedback, which is so important, back to the planning councils, whatever it is.
These particular amendments, first of all, like I said, are only for very dire emergency situations like the lockdown, or when a state of emergency has been called. There will be guidelines that are being drafted by the department that will hopefully be released around the same time as this act takes effect, that will outline things like technological considerations. Virtual participation will be a big one, and accessibility. And these guidelines hopefully will be able to guide electronic meetings that do have to take place as to how to get that virtual participation and that feedback.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Okay, the other aspect of that is that along with the consultation, or what you get online, there's usually a file of drawings, and you know, when I have an architect's office, I'll give a file like that, and you get it printed back up. 3x5 drawings, which you can see, but generally speaking, the stuff that's available online, it's not possible to see what the heck they're talking about. And it seems to me, at the very least, it should be a provision that if there are public documents like that, that they should be displayed somewhere full size for inspection, you know, with or without your mask or whatever. I'm not saying it has to be crowds going there, but it should be available full size, or it doesn't mean anything.
Yes, so the public inspection of documents, there is also an option on request to have the documents mailed, emailed, or faxed to you so that you can have a paper copy of whatever document is being inspected.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Well, I've gotten copies like that. They're equally useless. When you get a little 8.5 by 11 drawing of one that's originally 3 by 5 feet. I personally think there should be a clause in there requiring the drawings to be displayed full size somewhere. Anyway, but thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
No further questions.
Any other questions? Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be absolutely sure, I'm pretty certain this is the case, but the provisions of this amendment would only come into effect during a stated public emergency.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Leader of the
I asked
Opposition.
that because, you know, we've got so used to now meeting electronically and on Zoom or whatever, and I know there have been some instances in the recent past, very recent past, where a council decision was overturned because they didn't meet the provisions of public meetings sufficiently. At least that's what the courts decided. So outside of a stated state of emergency, this facility cannot be used to substitute for a regular public meeting then, can it?
No, only during a defined state of emergency, and that's clear in the amendments as well. Yes.
Leader of the Opposition.
Great, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks. Thank you.
Any other questions? Shall it carry?
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Planning Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Being enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without change. Amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Planning Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the 13th order of the day now be read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 13, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, Bill number 15, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 15, an act to amend the Liquor Control Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Social Development and Housing, that this House now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister, the Honourable Member of Tignish, Pomeroy, Deputy Speaker, to chair the committee of the whole House, please.
Is now in the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Liquor Control Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansard?
Richard Blackier, Supervisor of Regulatory Operations for the Prince Edward Island Liquor Control Commission.
Thank you and welcome. Promoter, would you like to start with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you, Chair. The bill will address consumer demand for low percentage alcohol and retail locations to remove the interprovincial import limits on alcohol beverages. Stemming from the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement, it will allow patrons to bring their own bottle of commercially made wine into a licensed dining room for a sit-down meal, and it will allow them to take their unfinished bottle of commercially made wine from a licensed dining room after it has been recorked by the licensee.
Thank you. Honourable members, it's a pleasure to the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or open to general questions. Any questions? Shall the bill carry? No question. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, could you just speak to the first clause around the reduction of the percentage of alcohol?
It's actually about the ability to sell low percentage alcohol outside of liquor store, so like in grocery stores. It's been something that the public have been advocating to me on a regular basis since I became minister. So one of the arguments that has been put forward is a number of people who are, have a problem with alcohol, drinking, feel more comfortable going to a grocery store to purchase that than going into a liquor store.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And so this is not something that PEI has ever done, correct? This,
Prince Edward Island did allow it back in, it reverted back to the way it is now back in 1992.
Mermaid Stratford?
thank you, Chair. And do you know why that happened back in 1992?
I can't offer up any answer for you. That's before my administration. We could always go back and check, but that's before my time with the Liquor Commission.
Mermaid Stratford?
So, and that would have been a change in legislation. Did we review the legislation prior to making the change in this bill, and historical information?
Yes.
Okay.
We've been in contact with the PEI Police Chiefs Association, and they're all on board with it, and that's Charlottetown, Summerside, Kensington, and the RCMP, and they support the change up to a maximum of 0.5%.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just a little surprised that this was something that we used to do. We stopped doing it, and it's been 20 years, and why it's coming back now. I don't know if you have any background on that at all.
Well, it's bringing us, so this is an item that will bring Prince Edward Island in comparable to other jurisdictions. Right now, there are 6 provinces and 2 territories that allow 0.5% alcohol, and the province of Ontario is at a 0.7% volume of alcohol, and Alberta and British Columbia is at 1%. The federal standard is 1%, so when the commission looked at it, it was a 3-pronged approach in consultation with the Police Chiefs Association, with the cap I already mentioned. Most of our sister provinces elected to go with the 0.5%, and that includes New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. So that's why we went with the 0.5% cap also.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Chair. I know, I'm addressing through the chair, sorry. In the current government's election platform, there was a desire to bring forward policy that alcohol could be sold in places other than the liquor store. Can you tell me if this paves any kind of pathway to that, or if this is part of a plan?
This would be a separate issue. I think just having the ability for people to purchase, very low percentage alcohol in a grocery store works well for people that have addictions, if you want to try and lower your consumption. And like I say, it's been a push from the general public that to me as the minister. So it has nothing to do with our platform promise, and the platform promise is something that we are reviewing, and we were I would say a little further along before COVID hit, and I know we don't want to use COVID as an excuse, but it did take majority of time in the finance department, and so we haven't really put our priority on changing, where alcohol is sold, but I am pushing that we move that forward again, and what that looks like yet to be determined.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just to clarify, did you say you're moving forward with bringing that forward again? Is that what your plan is still to sell it in corner stores?
Not necessarily. We're going to look at corner stores versus more agency stores and what that would look like across the province.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay. So is there any restrictions in place for who this can be sold to? The low percentage alcohol if we're selling it in grocery stores?
So when the amendment, when the changes are made in the amendment, and the low percentage alcohol becomes the maximum of 0.5%, it can be sold in grocery stores and other retail stores, and this in turn means that the product would no longer be considered alcohol.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. So does that mean people under the age of 19 can purchase it?
For all intents and purposes?
Yes, yeah, for all intents and purposes. It becomes, once it's considered not alcohol, it becomes a matter under the Food and Drug Act. We scanned other jurisdictions to see if they had any legislation with regards to your question, having minors buy low percentage alcohol, and none of the other provinces have any kind of legislation addressing that.
Mermaid Stratford.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And so when you spoke to the police chiefs about this, was there any concern about that, or have you spoken to anybody within health PEI around?
It would be the same category as College.
As I say before, the Police Chiefs Association are in support of it up to 0.5%.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
So one of the drawbacks of, I'm going to go to section 2, if that's okay, where unless, because it's general questions, right? We're not going section by section. In the section 2, we talk about bring your own wine, correct?
Yes.
Can you give an overview of that just for the record?
Okay, so this is another initiative by the Prince Edward Island Liquor Control Commission to bring us into line with what other jurisdictions are doing. So basically, it's a two-pronged effect. If this legislation is passed, it allows a patron to basically go to a liquor store, purchase or select their own bottle of wine and bring it to the licensed restaurant or not licensed restaurant that they're going to be dining at. And then when they enter the premises, you turn it over to the frontline staff, and the frontline staff serve it to you. Part 2 of that is, if you don't purchase anything at our corporate liquor stores and you find yourself in a licensed premises, you can purchase a bottle of wine, and if you don't finish it, it can be recorked for you, and then you can take it home with you.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Is there any exceptions you expect to put in place regarding selling liquor from someone other than the commission? Like, can they purchase it direct from the breweries or direct from a winery?
No, so the patron has the two choices. They can either purchase it at a corporate liquor store, or they can purchase it on the premises of the licensed establishment.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And who determines whether it was purchased at a local, like at a licensed liquor store?
I should rephrase that. As long as it's manufactured by a distillery or a microbrewery, and they would be able to purchase at one of those locations, retail outlets, if they wanted to. Apologize for that.
You can't bring your own homemade bottle of wine to the restaurant.
That's
It has
correct.
to be purchased from a licensed establishment.
Yeah, the manufacturer seal has to be on the bottle, and then it can be removed on the premises.
Okay, Mermaid Stratford, do you have any more questions? I still have others on the
Yeah, go ahead.
list, and I can come back.
Can I just ask one follow-up
Sure.
on that before
Yep.
we? To that point, some people create beautiful labels for their wine. They put the sleeve on, they cap it really nice. It almost looks like you've purchased it at the store. Is that up to the server to know if that is a bottle of wine that they can bring in and that it's not like? Do they have to make do they have to distinguish that?
The frontline staff should be aware of the manufacturer's seal that are on the products bought at a microbrewery or a distillery or a corporate liquor store versus what's produced at a ferment on premises outlet. They don't have any manufacturer seals on those bottles.
And there's usually a front label and a back label. It says where it's made, and I have a little experience in this.
know.
I know. So, yes, you can have a nice label, but it doesn't say, from whatever winery. It just has, very generic. So a server would be anyone who has their licensed server certificate would be able to tell the difference.
Member Stratford, do you wish to be put back on the
No,
list?
you go right ahead, yeah.
Do you wish to be back?
I'll go back on the list,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
O'Leary and Verness.
Thanks, Chair. I want to add a little bit of course, I have a favorite brewery in my district there, and it was interesting that I was there the other day, and there was a customer come in, and they wanted to take their growler that they got at the brewery upstairs to eat with their meal, and they're told that they could not do that. That was against the rules. Will this change that ability, this legislation change that ability? Because once again, if you're buying a growler for a table, say as an example, it'd be far cheaper than buying each individual. And when I talked to the owner, that was the law. It wasn't a case that was his policy.
So we're currently looking into that. Right now, the growlers are considered not packaged products.
There's no seal on it.
There's no seal on it or anything like that. So that's why those laws were in place. But we're currently, I just sent out a scan last week to our other jurisdictions and to try to find out how they handle it. And as soon as I get all the information collected, I'll be passing it on.
O'Leary and Verness.
So you're saying if somehow that brewery could do a seal on it, so I'm assuming a seal would be some sort of a thing that would go over the top of the cap, or under the cap, I guess, and that would mean it would be sealed?
No, because we still don't consider the growlers a packaged product.
Oh.
I mean, there could be a possibility, and Richard will correct me if I'm wrong, but that there's a paper label that goes right over the twist on the cap, maybe, I don't know, but as Richard said, we're working with all of the producers to figure out what we can do.
So the chair will probably recognize me, but anyway, so
might,
as an
he might.
example, the brewery also, has these large bottles, and they're actually sealed in wax and the cork. Would that qualify them that they could buy that and then take it up to their table, or take it to another restaurant? I guess would be the point. You could go in there and get would that be considered a sealed product?
What you're describing, I haven't seen what you're describing to me, but if
I don't necessarily want you to go down there a whole lot,
if it came under the wording of what we consider a packaged product, it would be. But as I stated, I actually haven't seen this item that you're speaking about.
Right. Okay. So she'll get you the description right here.
Anyway.
So.
It's
you
called
bring it over to her?
Let's Be Frank, and I think there's a 3-mile limit.
Honourable members, you're going to commence.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Shall carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration Bill to be entitled an Act to amend the Liquor Control Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Summerside South Drive, that Order 21 of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order 21, an act to amend the Electric Power Act, Bill number 104, ordered for second reading.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Summerside South Drive, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 104, an act to amend the Electric Power Act, read a second time.
The honourable member for Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by Summerside South Drive, that this House do now resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, please.
Now in a Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Electric Power Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and position for Hansard?
Patrick Levesque, Principal Secretary in the Opposition Office.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Promoter, would you like to start with just a general statement on the bill's intent?
Certainly. This bill is a partner act, the act to amend the Renewable Energy Act, which we debated previously, and contributes to modernizing our energy legislation towards a fairer and cleaner energy future. Specifically, the bill will require that future rate structures promote energy efficiency. It will introduce time-variant pricing, which would be in part based on promoting the use of local renewable energy through price signals, and it will provide a 3-year transitionary class for agriculture to avoid rate shock that may come with changes to the rate structure and to give farmers time to adapt to these changes. Most of the changes, including this bill, reflect changes that are already in the works, either through the government plans or decisions of the regulator. This bill provides greater certainty to help resolve some of our long-standing issues, and it gives clear direction to the utility on our collective goals in regards to better supporting vulnerable islanders and in fighting climate change.
Thank you very much. Honourable members, is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be now read clause by clause or open to general questions?
Section by section.
Section by section.
Clause by clause.
So section 1, are there any questions on section 1? Summerside Wilmot.
I was just hoping that the promoter could give us a sense of what Section 1's changes aim to do.
Certainly. Would you like to take that one, Patrick?
Sure. So Section 1 is really just a small change in the energy efficiency and demand-side resources plans that the utilities have to submit, and it just adds a requirement to include an estimate on the greenhouse gas reductions that the plan is attempting to achieve.
Summerside Wilmot.
I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at the emissions reductions estimate, section 5.2, and it talks about an energy efficiency and demand side resources plan, and it uses the word a reasonable estimate of greenhouse gas and other emissions reductions. And I mean, I'm just wondering how you chose that phrase reasonable here. I mean, we have clear goals for greenhouse gas and emission reductions in our legislation. And I guess, yeah, I guess that's my first question.
Good question.
Yeah.
Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the reasonable estimate is because a demand-side resources plan is just a plan. It's not something that happened in history. It's what you're planning to do moving forward. So it's impossible to have an entirely accurate scenario. But perhaps Patrick could clarify further.
Part of it as well, with reasonable, obviously that would need to be interpreted by the regulator. So these plans have to go through the regulator and be approved. So the regulator could then decide if sufficient estimate has been given. It's also so that we don't specify in this the level to which, like, the level of detail that needs to be included there. That's open to a certain amount of interpretation by the regulator.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So,
Useful on that side.
seeing as we do have definite goals for greenhouse gas and other emission reductions, a number of different ones. There's ones in the legislation. There's been a commitment by 2040 that we're going to be, net. So is the commission going to be expected to review these reasonable estimates in the context of those?
Okay, I got it.
Those commitments, or I'm just trying to figure out if this section's actually going to have any teeth, to make sure, because I mean a public utility could come with what they consider a reasonable estimate, but it might not actually get us to where we need to go. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think Patrick can cover this.
Yeah, so I think the term reasonable in the context of this section is it's intended to apply to the estimate that the utility provides of how much the plan will reduce emissions. It's not in any way linked to the provincial or the goals set by the province or by the legislature. It doesn't require that this plan align with those. It's just about, I think, the rigorousness of the estimate that's provided in the plan, if that makes sense.
Okay, honourable members, just for clarification, in the bill it states section 1.1, and then it goes 5.2, and then it goes 2. That is not section 2. Section 2 is actually the 3 below. So it's not going to change the bill or anything. That we don't need to make any change to that. But just so you're aware, so there's really only 2 sections in this bill.
Yeah.
Okay. The Minister of Social Development and Housing.
All right. Sorry, Chair. I think the sponsor of the bill.
Yes, I
Okay,
have a little bit to add there. So the demand-side resources plan estimates how much reduction in demand the plan will have and how much a reduction in energy consumed might have. So it all just relates to that actual plan. And as I understand it, it's something that is being done already. So the reasonableness would be the same sort of rigor that they apply to the demand-side resources plan itself. It's a reasonable guess. That's what the plan is.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So, so just to be clear, right now, public utilities do have energy efficiency and demand-side resources plans that they submit to the Commission?
Yes, they do. The PEI Energy Corporation is a utility for the purposes of demand-side management and efficiency now.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
And just, I mean, it's been a while since I really dug into this sort of thing, and I know there's a lot of details, very technical at times, but can you just give a quick overview, if you don't mind, of what you mean by energy efficiency and demand side resources plan? Again, I know that the member from Summerside, Wilmot, I kind of had you give an overview of what you're trying to accomplish here, but just so I can wrap my head again around what an energy efficiency and demand side resources plan actually is.
Certainly. Well, efficiency has to do with the use of less energy, so it's a plan to try to encourage energy efficiency, the use of less energy, to use less overall, and that's applied broadly to all ratepayers on Prince Edward Island. And demand-side management is, at any one time, we're using a certain amount of megawatts or gigawatts of power, whatever it might be, and you're trying to reduce that peak load. So demand-side management has to do with our peak load, and efficiency has to do with our energy use.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
No, thank you, that does help. So this really is looking at the plans of a public utility like Maritime Electric or a Summerside Electric to try and do load leveling, as well as reduce the amount of energy overall that's used?
Correct. Patrick?
Chair?
Yep.
I'll add that in the Act already, under, so this bill adds a section, subsection 5.2 in section 16.1. Subsections 5 and 5.1, which will precede this new one, contain a list of the requirements of what has to be in one of these plans. So we've got things like, contain the particular energy efficiency and demand-side resource measures, a reasonable estimate of the financial cost for both the public utility and its customers. So there is a certain amount of guidance already in the Act as to what those plans have to contain. This is just adding one additional provision to those.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So right now, Chair, can public utilities use energy storage systems to work towards energy efficiency and demand-side resources, like it's part of their plan? And, especially distributed energy storage systems. I know in your other bill you talk about, defining aggregator and energy storage systems. But what's stopping them from using that today to try and achieve this goal as part of their energy efficiency and demand-side resources plans?
There's nothing really stopping them from doing it at a grid scale and doing it themselves. They could install a battery system instead of a generator system, for instance. But what's stopping it from happening at a distributed level where you're involving loads that are behind the meter is that there's rules about what is allowed to go behind the meter and the transactions that occur there. We have net metering in place to allow solar to go back and forth, energy to go back and forth for solar customers. And the other legislation that we were speaking about yesterday brings in a change that adds storage to that. So it just permits the flow of energy to come from storage instead of only solar or a wind turbine or whatever might be in that net metering agreement.
So,
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So to be clear today, I mean, one of the things that you've talked about and which is really an interesting thing is this vehicle to grid technology. So you have many electric vehicles. I know the Minister of Energy wants to see that on the island, and so you'd have them all potentially charged up, but then accessible to the public utility to do load leveling when there's peak demand by actually taking that energy from those electric vehicle batteries and then flowing them back out into the grid. So are you saying they could include that as part of their energy efficiency and demand side resources plan today, but is that allowed today?
They would have to own all of that infrastructure. It couldn't have anything to do with the customer side of things, but perhaps Patrick would like to weigh in on anything further, but currently
outside the scope of this bill, so.
Yeah, the utility can do anything they want on the utility side of things. It's when you become behind the meter, which is where you charge your electric car when you're at home in any case, or when you're at your business. It's also where you would have home storage, things like that. The utility cannot deal with those kind of assets today.
So I just
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So right now, like legally, as per our laws, they could not actually access power coming back, whether it was from a Powerwall, Tesla Powerwall that I had in my garage, or an electric vehicle that I had stored. Like, they could not include that as part of their energy efficiency and demand side resources plan because they're not allowed to bring that back onto the grid.
there is a very, very prescriptive set of conditions that you have to satisfy to provide service or you transmit energy on Prince Edward Island. All of those kinds of things are what protects the monopoly of the utility and their sole right to distribution of energy. The only thing that allows net metering customers to do it is that we have the regulations and legislation in place to permit it.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So, I mean, one of the things that I think we've talked about in the past is this idea of, you know, having this energy storage, but also having a way to generate the energy that's stored, which could be shared by multiple people. You know, for example, a solar farm idea. So you have, you know, land that's not good for agriculture and not good for building. Perhaps it's in a remote part of the island, or it's you know, swampy and, you know, not good for a lot. And you could build a large solar farm there, as opposed to me having to put the solar panels on my property and then use net metering. Then you could actually feed that in to some sort of energy storage mechanism, and then the energy utility company could then use that in times for load leveling. So right now, if the public utility did that themselves and they said, we want to build a big solar farm and we're going to allow people to invest in that solar farm and, you know, give them credit for the energy that's produced by their 2.5 solar panels or whatever they want to calculate, or whatever kilowatts that they own, could the public utility do that themselves if they owned all the infrastructure? If you know what I mean?
As long as it's on their side of the meter, they can put whatever, and it's approved by the regulator, Minister. That they can't just invest whatever they want. They have to go before the regulator and say, we'd like to make this investment and prove that it's in the best interest of the ratepayers.
Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Okay, that's all for now, Chair.
You're welcome. Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
I'm not going to talk for very long. Like yesterday, I'm not in favor of this bill either. You don't have any modeling, you haven't presented any modeling, and you're talking about things that I want to go over a few things. And in 1.1, this is already legislated through the Net Zero Carbon Act, so this is already a piece of legislation that's been passed in the legislature. We're already doing it. And as you've noted, the PI Energy Corporation, as a utility for the purpose of demand-side management, has to report to IRAC on our demand-side management plan. We're currently working on our demand-side management plan. You know, I feel like this is already dealt with. Maritime Electric also provides their emission numbers to IRAC, so I feel like this is that piece of the legislation is repeating stuff that's already been done by the regulator. And, you know, whether or not you support what IRAC does is probably a debate for another day, but at this point they are the regulator. I'm not overly comfortable with the language about the reasonable estimate of greenhouse gas, because having it not defined opens the question for what's reasonable and reasonable by who gets to decide what is reasonable. The promotion of energy efficiency, we do those things. Like we have a whole group that is what they do. And as we talked about in the legislature already, we have all kinds of new programs that we're going to push out through there, and that's likely who's going to be responsible for smart meter program when it comes out, or we're trying to figure out how to make that.
That's not this section, Minister.
All Section 1.
We were doing all of Section 1, so Section 1 is Section 1, bracket 1, 5.2, and bracket 2 is also included. Minister, you have the floor.
Yep. So I'm just telling you everything that's wrong with the bill, and this is the only time I'm going to talk, because I plan to vote against it. So IRAC's ordered Maritime Electric to present a properly designed rate structure that will effectively allocate the cost based on the system usage and their revenue to cost ratio. this whole thing is extremely complex, and I know that you tried to get in the middle of it whenever it was at IRAC, so, you know, you're basically trying to circumvent what process is already happening. The elimination of the declining, the second block, which I've said publicly I wasn't happy with, it's going ahead, and they have a 3-year plan to put that in place, so they're doing that. And they have a study underway now that's basically going to present options for a rate structure, and they need time to complete that. And creating the agricultural rate class is something that you basically argued against in the legislature here. That you said that it was that the rates would class would just subsidize the rate and push it off to somebody else, and that's basically what you're doing there. We are also working with farmers. The Minister of Agriculture and myself have a plan to help farmers overcome the second block loss, and you know, probably if you ask the minister in question here, he'd probably tell you about it. And the additional class would create complexity to the system that's already completely complex. The time variant pricing, there are no varying cost energy on the market or the Maritimes due to our small size. So time variant pricing isn't possible in this time without smart meters, which I said we're going to implement. That's not a quick implement, so we can't do that. It has to be over a number of years because it's an exorbitant cost. Maritime Electric would have to change their internal systems to allow that to happen. When systems are in place to support them, the time of day pricing could provide value as an option, but it could also drive customers to cut their electricity during peak usage time. And you know, if the critical peaks can be lessened, then the capacity needed in the system is smaller, which is less of capital cost for the utility. So, and as I noted yesterday, we were doing our own act review. We did a public consultation. We're modeling it now, and I can't stress enough how important modeling is. And the member from Mermaid Stratford noted that I spoke like this today during a debate here, and I know that it's you know, she made some good points about taxation, and you call what we do taxation with the Energy Corporation, and effectively we need to be able to prove that what we are doing is going to do what we want it to do, so that we don't impact people who are in the lower income brackets, and that we can do this in a positive manner. I think that, you know, I think we're trying to accomplish some of the same things. We're going about it in a structured manner that's going to allow us to know for sure that we're going to get the results of it. And you may not believe that, but we're getting close to the point where we can release that document publicly, and I look forward to doing that. So, you know, for those reasons, I'd be against the act. I don't dispute your goals. I think we share a lot of goals, but I'm not sure. I think, and I've said this numerous times in discussion with some of my colleagues here, is that when we go at some of these things that are complex and piecemeal, we could end up with a terrible mess, and I don't want to do it. And I know that you have a group of people that are tweeting at me who really want this, and which is fine. And some of them will probably be working with me on an initiative that's coming up, and they might be happy to see the things that we're doing and the knowledge that I have that they may not think I have. And it's unfortunate that, you know, for these folks, if they'd like to reach out to me, they definitely could. I'm quite interested in hearing their perspective, but to date they haven't offered it. So that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. And honourable members, we're doing this section by section, but he did preface that he was not going to vote. These are the reasons why, so I allowed it, that leverage in this one. So if you want to reply to section 1 of it for now, you can.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I'll, in section 1, with regards to the language of a reasonable estimate, I will, part of the reason that that language is used is because that's the language that's already in the Act, in section 16.1 sub 5, subsection E, which is the same, the section that lays out the requirements for the energy efficiency and demand side resources plan. The clause there is that an order made under this subsection shall contain a reasonable estimate of the financial costs and the financial benefits for both the utility and its customers. And that's repeated in subsection 5.1. So the regulator already experienced with interpreting this kind of language. So we felt that it was reasonable to use, sorry, that was unintentional, that it was reasonable to copy the same sort of language that's already in the Act.
Okay. Any other questions on section 1? Shall section 1 carry? Okay, I'm now taking questions for section 2. Questions on section 2? Shall section 2 carry? O'Leary and Verness.
For the member for Summerside South Drive, could you maybe explain a little bit more on this section here, specifically, the impacts that this will have on agriculture as pertaining to their bill, just to give me some sort of sense of what you see in this?
Well, the agricultural class being created will allow the continuation of an existing rate structure, but it will be up to the regulator, who has been seeking the removal of the second block rate structure, the declining rate structure, and transitioning farms who no longer fit into that rate class to another rate class. So instead of immediately being transitioned to another rate class, or within 3 years, as the minister has indicated here, this creates an actual class for the farms where the rules can be set differently for any other rate class.
O'Leary and Verness.
Okay, so have you had much consultation with the agricultural groups like the Federation of Agriculture? I think you alluded a little bit yesterday that you did, but I just, for the record, maybe let me know which ones you had consultations with and what their recommendations were.
Certainly. Patrick, do you have that list there?
Sure. Find it in my pile of documents. We did consult with both the Federation of Agriculture and the Dairy Farmers of PEI. We sent them the draft legislation as well as summaries, and we met with both of them as well. Their main concern was around sufficient time to transition. They recognized that the rate structure was going to change, that it needed to change, but just wanted time to adapt.
I'd also add in answer to that, when you're asking, the time variant pricing itself is something that particularly dairy farms would be able to use, because they use a lot of heat for hot water, and that is storage that can absorb energy when energy rates are low and reduce bills. So it gives another option as well to those farms. By December 31st, 2022, any decision made thereafter by the regulator shall ensure that time variant pricing is contained as an option.
The other thing I'll note is that when we consulted with those groups, it was on an earlier version of this bill, and this particular clause was added as a result of that consultation, so it's in response to those concerns that we heard.
O'Leary and Verness.
Yeah, no, I've had some discussions too with the Federation of Agriculture on the subject, and I certainly can see that there are some advantages of time of day billing and things of that nature. But one of the comments that was made to me was that they felt that 3 years is still a little tight, and they would like to see it to be 5 years. And I'd like to, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend And the motion amends subsection 20, 1-5 of the Electric Power Act to extend an exemption for an agricultural class of customers from the proposed 3 years to 5 years. Therefore, I'd like to move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty, Section 3 of Bill 104 is amended to propose subsection 20, bracket 1.5, by the deletion of the word 3 and the substitution of the word 5. And I do have copies, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're just going to give a moment to pass out the amendment and give each of you an opportunity to see it and read it.
Okay, I guess I hit them anyway, but yeah.
So there is a motion on the floor. Are there any questions?
Chair, I'll ask a question.
Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
So I commend the member for looking out for farmers. I know what he's doing. For us, just being against the bill, I think that, so I'd probably vote against your amendment, not that if the bill was going to pass, I'd probably vote for it, but considering I want the bill to not pass, I would vote against it. But what I will say is that there's a number of ways that we can help farmers overcome this, and there's places in the current rate structure where they could end up, especially the larger ones, the big consumers, like a general service or something like that they could go into that would help them. But we plan to help them greatly with efficiencies. So there's a lot, as you know, I don't have to tell you about farming. You can tell me lots about farming. There's lots of efficiencies that can be found inside a farm, and we want to help with that. We want to help reduce consumption and set the target for the difference in the rate. So that's basically what we're going to commit to do. I won't get into the details because I'll leave that to the minister, but that's basically the plan. So we're not going to leave them hanging. We're absolutely going to take care of them. That's it.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to put it to the floor. Shall the amendment carry? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Though contrary, nay? Nay. Okay, I am going to have to ask you to raise your hands. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you very much. All those not in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. The amendment will not be carried. It's 13 to 12. Okay, we're back to section 2. Any other questions on section 2? Shall section 2 carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
No.
Okay. So again, we're going to have to do another thing on it. So those in favor of the bill carrying without amendment, in favor of it carrying, please raise your hand. In favor of carrying, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, those not in favor of the bill carrying, please raise your hand. Okay, the bill will not be carried.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill not recommended.
Shall it carry? Do I sign this one? Okay. Right here. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House having under consideration the bill to be entitled an Act to amend the Electric Power Act, I beg leave to report that committee has gone through the said bill and does not recommend the same to the Legislative Assembly. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask that motion 13 be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Motion 13. The honourable member for Mermaid Stratford moves, seconded by the honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the following motion. Whereas the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission is responsible for regulating utilities and matters of land use and acquisition, hearing appeals of decisions under various statutes and performing such other functions as may be conferred upon the Commission under any enactment, and whereas the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission reports to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning and its members are appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council, and whereas reporting directly to the Legislative Assembly would enhance legislators' understanding of IRAC and empower members of the legislature to better support the Commission's work, therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly express its support for making the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission independent from government by reporting directly to the Legislative Assembly and to have the Commission's members appointed by the Legislative Assembly.
I'll ask the mover of the motion to start debate. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr.
Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to bring this motion forward. IRAC has been the subject of much public interest lately, and that's not surprising. IRAC is responsible for regulating and adjudicating on many matters that affect islanders. Planning Act appeals, the regulation of petroleum prices, tenancy arrangements under the Residential Property Act, electricity prices, and the list goes on. And of course, one area that is of particular interest is the Lands Protection Act. Under the current Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission Act, the Commission reports to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. The rationale for this responsibility is relatively straightforward. The Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning is responsible for matters that are removed from the IRAC's mandate, which reduces the possibility of conflict. And while that might be good in theory, it's not necessarily good or desirable in practice. The minister is often too distant from the work of IRAC, never taking the time to learn or question the ins and outs of the commission. We've certainly seen the implications of that in this assembly, where the minister responsible hasn't always provided satisfactory answers about the happenings within the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission. This motion proposes two changes. First, it would propose that the members of the Commission be appointed by the Legislative Assembly rather than Executive Council. We have already established processes to do this with other officials, such as the Child and Youth Advocate, the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and so forth. Second, we would like the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission to report to the Legislative Assembly directly. This reporting responsibility would allow IRAC to be frank with the Legislative Assembly's members about its needs. Earlier this week, the Minister of Agriculture and Land, 2 weeks ago now, the Minister of Agriculture and Land said that the IRAC was meeting with Executive Council on land issues. And that's great to hear, but the Legislative Assembly at large has no way of knowing what kinds of conversations IRAC is having with Executive Council or the Minister of Education. The Legislative Assembly is the body that introduces and passes laws on PEI. It is not desirable for the Legislative Assembly to it is not desirable for the Legislative Assembly to be kept up to date on IRAC's needs or concerns. How is the Legislative Assembly supposed to understand and correct legislative gaps or flaws if it is being kept in the dark? Frankly, the current arrangement disempowers the Legislative Assembly, and this needs to be corrected. These are two simple changes, but I believe these are two positive changes that would positively affect the Legislative Assembly's ability to ensure that IRAC is supported and able to do its very important work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last months and years, we have found that the information that IRAC gathers in its management, in particular the files relating to the residential rental and property, have made it very difficult to establish the veracity of what people are experiencing in the community. We are having more and more to rely on what people tell us is their experience because we can't get the data and information that we need clearly and accurately from the body that is meant to be enforcing the regulations and laws that are in place and supporting both tenants and landlords. This area of focus for me has been particularly frustrating because without that evidence to be able to support from that regulatory body, we're not able to really clearly show members across the floor or inform clearly policy decisions or recommendations from this House on what action we actually need to take. An example being the current and ongoing discussions around the need for a rental registry. I am not able to talk to staff at IRAC to find out how they feel about that. I'm not able to get the data that I need that tells me what cases have been filed and what happened with those files. The files that are available are only certain ones that have been appealed, and they're available as PDFs. I think as something we've heard a lot in this government is about the need for open resources and open data. And by its very nature, IRAC is a very closed space. Obviously, it's critical that the autonomy of that body remains, but what we don't have at the moment is actually even any requirement for accountability, transparency, or reporting. We know how important reports from some of the bodies that come through this space are. Without reports that we get on a regular basis from the various different institutions, agencies, boards, commissions, and so on, we don't know what's happening with expenditures. We don't get the data snapshot. And we shouldn't have to wait for instance, an AG report or for there to be a crisis or for there to be a grassroots movement that's pushing for answers to see change. Mr. Speaker, working with my colleagues in the House and here, there are a number of different places that obviously IRAC has jurisdiction, and housing is only one of them. But the current experience of renters in PEI who, and frankly the landlords too, who do not know or understand their rights and obligations under the current Residential Tenancy Act has been eye-opening. Legislation is not easy to read. It is not easy to implement and enforce. But it's really quite clear that there is not only a bit of a grey space when it comes to islanders understanding how those laws apply to them, but there's also a fear of the body itself. And Mr. Speaker, I think that's really unfortunate, and it's really worrying that when islanders talk about IRAC and their experiences with it, it's one of fear, of being overwhelmed, of it being a space that they're not comfortable to go into. The idea of having to take a case there is frankly something that I hear over and over again, oh no, I could never do that. That's not what we're supposed to be doing when we're providing something like this. The Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission is meant to be a space that provides that service and support to all islanders, regardless of who they are. And if we have a body which, by its very sort of structure and lack of transparency, Mr. Speaker, has people feeling afraid of it, then I think we really need to ask some really hard questions about how and why that has happened. Mr. Speaker, I think one of the other aspects that I'm seeing is that solutions are often not as difficult as we think they are. Most of the time, the challenges that we have that prevent us from finding solutions are that we don't want to. Perhaps we don't want to because we're afraid of what we're going to find out. Mr. Speaker, when we make it easier for tenants and landlords through something like the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission to understand not only how many other people there are just like them, but what common problems they're experiencing, I think we empower them. We see that happening when we have more information about our housing statistics. We see that happen when we begin to find information being released about how much money people are getting or not getting on social assistance. We see it over and over again in this House, Mr. Speaker, that when we share information, it empowers people. It empowers legislators to make good policy. It empowers residents of the province to be able to stand up for their rights. And it empowers government to ensure that the resources are provided where they're needed. I honestly think that one of the things I've heard more often than not is that IRAC needs more staff and more support. But if we don't know exactly what it is that they need because they can't tell us, because they don't report here, then we can't help them. We can't help the islanders that need them. And Mr. Speaker, that's just a shame. So I am very pleased to be able to speak from that perspective today, Mr. Speaker, about this motion and the need to be able to bring more accountability, transparency and support to the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission and to move it from Executive Council to this body, which is, after all, the House of the People. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Thank the honourable member for bringing this motion forward. I'm going to keep my comments very brief. As the House knows, IRAC operates at an arm's length from government. The last review of IRAC was conducted by Executive Council in 1996. Mr. Speaker, IRAC reports to the Legislative Assembly through the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, as we all know in here, and IRAC falls into the falls under Education and Lifelong Learning because our department is unlikely to be in a conflict with any commission business such as land use or utilities. Under the Act, the Minister does not have authority to direct the work of the Commission. I think that the Act certainly needs to be revisited, but our priority right now is the Residential Tenancy Act and Lands Protection Act. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Anyone else that would like to speak to the motion? If not, the Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been sitting there all day long. My legs need to be stretched anyway. So the IRAC, there's always a conversation about IRAC in this Legislative Assembly. And for those that have been around here longer than me, have probably heard more debates about IRAC than I have, or probably that they care to have. But for those of you who are just early on in your political journey, you'll probably hear a lot more talk about IRAC over the course of your career. I think there's been a lot of, I feel anyways, that there's been a lot of misunderstanding of the relationship that the Executive Council has with IRAC, and clearly from sitting in cabinet the last 22 months, it's given me a new perspective on how that works. And I know when I was in opposition, I certainly thought it was different than it was. I think that I think that every time we turn around, there's new stuff that we want to push on top of the Legislative Assembly for them to take care of. And it's really the Legislative Assembly office, as the clerk and the deputy clerk can attest to, has their hands full. They have a lot of things going on here, and to continually push other things on top of them appears like it would be burdensome, in my opinion. It's we have a clear function to operate as an assembly, and I feel like IRAC, already being an independent body, is independent. And I don't know, by taking them into the assembly, are you doubling down and trying to reintroduce an independence to an independent body? The majority of what IRAC probably does, no one in here knows about, or because the stuff goes on down there every single day where somebody has something in front of IRAC. the only time that the Assembly seems to get concerned about IRAC when it's that one big file, which granted there is. I mean, those things happen. There's no two ways about it. I'm not sure that by making them independent to the Legislative Assembly is going to somehow change that, because this is the Assembly going to will an independent body to do something that they're not willing to do. Like, I have a real struggle trying to wrap my head around what would happen in this newfound independence that IRAC will get. Clearly they already are independent, and clearly they are. I think they probably showed their independence, and much to the chagrin, perhaps to some on both sides of the floor here in the last year or so. So I think that I can't take away from that they definitely showed that they clearly are independent. So we took them under the Assembly. Like, what do we think that the Brindle Farms report would come back quicker? How would you what levers would you think we would have here to make that happen? What further levers? Because the whole thing about being independent is that you're independent, and I understand there's other independent offices here that report back to the Assembly. We don't tell them what to do either. The Auditor General doesn't get told what to do by the Assembly. The Privacy Commissioner doesn't get told what to do by the Assembly. The elections PEI folks don't get told what to do by the Assembly. But they're bound by the acts that guide them, which IRAC also is bound by probably several acts, because they're basically an administrative body in some cases to ensure that those parts of the act are followed. We had a debate here, prior to this motion about electricity, and IRAC is really involved in electricity, and there's parts of that piece that they do that makes my job a lot harder. Quite frankly, I'll be honest, it makes it a lot harder because, we can't be nimble. It's harder to be nimble and harder to be quick, and I mean, that's part of the reason why we're looking at the acts in the in-depth view that we are, because and it's not a knock on IRAC. They are actually applying the law against the utility, so in IRAC's terms, they're basically protecting islanders by ensuring that they are executing the act to the proper degree. I spoke here earlier about I wasn't happy about when they moved to delete the second block that they pushed. That was the result of it. But as the member from Summerside pointed out, and IRAC agrees that structure isn't necessarily fair because somebody pays for it. So it's hard to disagree with them and agree with them at the same time. But I respect that they're doing the job that's laid upon them. So I certainly wouldn't want to be somebody who works down there. I feel, in some days I feel bad for them. Some days they frustrate me, but some days I feel bad for them because the frustration that they end up receiving is the frustration of them doing their jobs, basically, and they're deep into policy, they're deep into legislation, they're deep into regulation. That's what they kind of do every day. And based on those things, we acted as an intervener on behalf of the province during that rate change discussion, and maybe our actions help make that block change last longer. I don't really know, but they're independent, and they showed their independence. So we clearly said we clearly said that this is not what we want, but they made that move. So it's another place where I feel like they've expressed their independence in their ability to do their job. So, as far as who gets to appoint them, again, it's the exact same scenario. That people that are down there, there's lawyers down there, and I have some friends that are lawyers. I'm sure lots of people in here are friends that are lawyers. They are bound by the law to keep their title as a lawyer. So when they get down there, regardless who put them there, or if there's a belief that they belong to a political party and that's how they end up down there, and I'm not saying that they don't, maybe they do, but when you look at it only from that lens, you're basically saying that person is incapable of following the law as they are prescribed to do by their degree and their call to the bar. So again, I feel like I'm defending them, which is kind of an odd feeling, because I've spent so much time frustrated with some of the results that come out of there, and I'm sure that I'm sure there's other members in here who've been frustrated, but they do a job, and they do a job for Islanders, and we don't always have to agree with them, but I find it really hard to cast aspersions on their ability to be independent simply because they're appointed through executive council. I think it's not fair to them. I mean, if you want to tackle the politicians who sit around that table who say yay or nay, but I mean, it's almost, I almost get the feeling that you think that we show up to cabinet and everybody's got a name and they're like, take mine, take mine, take mine. Like, for anybody who sat around the cabinet table, they know that's not at all what it's like. Our process, and I'll give the former government credit because they brought it in through I've given them credit for.
Honorable members, the hour has been called. The honorable member from Morel Donna and the government house leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the member from Charlottetown Winslow. This House adjourned until March 12th at 10 o'clock a.m.
Shall it carry?